So we should be live now. Yeah, we should be live.
Splendid.
So welcome everybody for tonight's stream on who won the War of 1812. I'm joined by the Colonel Pride review. Um, I wanted to have well, first of all, welcome to my channel.
Thank you for
Um,
having me.
and I really
I'm
wanted
very
to have
grateful
you
to
on
be here.
because I really, yeah, and I really want to have you on because, well, first of all, do check out the Colonel Pride Review YouTube channel. Great documentaries on, and very detailed as well, on particularly Australia, the history of Australia, and I think genuinely like the detail of part of British exploration and this sort of history. And that the reason I wanted you on for tonight's show is because this is a sort of a conflict which is it's quite complex in its um people the numbers of individuals who are involved. In some ways it's a bit of a three-way conflict between the United States, the Indians, and the British, but also, as the name of the stream sort of reckons, each side, and I've seen this when this has been talked about. The Americans claim victory, the Canadians claim victory in this, um, and in my mind, in some ways, the British could also claim uh, victory in this as well.
Absolutely.
And I, I,
Absolutely.
I I think, yeah, yeah, and it's, I mean, particularly on the naval front as well, and dominating the seas and trade and everything. This um, you know, nothing really changed before the conflict. After the conflict, I mean, sure, you had sort of the sort of negotiations of an agreement of territory, but really, when it comes down to it, for Britain, there was no real loss, no loss. Um, I mean, you could talk about the damage of war and everything, but I think, as as people will know about this conflict, Colonel Pride, the Americans had probably the most humiliating um, cost was the destruction of Washington D.C. and the burning of the White House.
Absolutely. That was a great humiliation for them. But even before that, the opening campaign of the war was an absolute disaster. The 1812 to beginning of 1813 campaign was just an unmitigated American defeat in the invasion of Canada. Now, I actually, ironically, at that time, what makes the war fascinating and exciting, I think, for everyone to study, or why it has generated interest in the past, and should generate more interest, is actually in the opening campaign. Expectations were broken because in the invasion of Canada, the Americans did very poorly. That is to say, the continental power um, underperformed on land, but Britain, the maritime power, underperformed at sea. And so, actually, in that first 6 months of the war, the Americans did incredibly well at sea. Now, as the war progresses, that changes, and results start to match expectations. So the Americans start to do better on land, and then Britain does better at sea. But for that beginning period is incredibly dramatic, precisely because it doesn't match with what people would generally expect from a continental power and a maritime power.
No, 100%. And I mean, before we talk about sort of like we just go back to the origins here, it's also worth noting that and there's an entire book on the naval campaigns of the War of 1812, which many Americans are sort of. I think a lot of American pride is drawn to the fact that they were able to um, win um, naval engagements against the British, against the Royal Navy, and bearing in mind the one of the causes that we will that will is that we'll talk about was press gangs, and press gangs that would take American sailors, board American ships looking for uh, British uh, sailors who have deserted and everything. And so I think for many Americans, when they say, well, they view this as a victory, I think that a lot of them do point towards the naval engagements, particularly.
Well,
Um,
yes. Well, then I would like to open with a point about war generally, actually, if you wouldn't mind. And
no, go ahead.
it's not specifically for the War of 1812, but I often have this sensation when discussing modern wars or historical wars with others that I felt there's a sort of disconnect some people have about how you assess who wins a war. War is not it's not a points game. Yeah, you don't score so many numbers of points for so many battles won or so
Yes.
much territory occupied. In the Western military tradition, wars have objectives. They're political objectives. And it's by attaining these that a participant can say to have won a war. So if you want to assess victory and defeat, you need to go back to the politics of the war and why they're engaged in this war. And then do they achieve their objectives?
Well, 100%, and this is why I've had this sort of disagreement with some Americans and other commentators before on this. Is well, the political objective of Madison and of the U.S. government was the conquest of Canada, or in their words, freeing Canada, freeing them from the tyranny of Britain. The colonies of Upper Lower Canada and Nova Scotia and so on. Um, and particularly the actual military targets being, like the likes of Quebec and Halifax. And of course, the Americans failed in this. There was no successful, invasion that would go on to capture, and there was no successful uprisings as well, which was another fact that there were hopes that there would be these popular
Indeed.
uprisings as well, which again didn't happen. And you know, I and I can understand why why the Americans viewed this, because of course at this time Britain was engaged in a very, very costly and lengthy conflict in Europe, in the Napoleonic Wars, particularly. I think at this time, uh, Wellesley was in Spain, towards the tail end of um, the expedition in Spain. You had the Royal Navy around Europe, around the Channel, North Sea, and even down into the Cape, and into India. And so there was this stretched out across the world. There's this. I had this great section in a book here of the British Empire, which was they called it. It was called Empire in Crisis, and it was basically saying, at this particular time of 1812, it was like the empire was just on assault on every front.
Yes, I mean, bear in mind when the Americans go to war, the Battle of Victoria in Spain hasn't been fought yet. Wellington's greatest victory in Spain hasn't happened yet. Actually, the prestige of the British Army is not that high in 1812. That's one of the reasons they pick that moment. Actually, their impression of British Army prowess at that time is not high. Now, I would like to I want to talk about war aims a bit more, actually, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, go
Because
ahead.
there's actually, you mentioned occupying Canada as a war aim. That is a war aim. It is not the only war aim. Actually, the Americans by this point have been building up the desire to go to war for years. Actually, it takes them a long time to actually convince themselves to do it, and it takes a lot of convincing to get different sections of American political establishment to go to war. When they do go to war, when they have the vote in Congress, it only just passes. It only just passes the vote. So it's actually quite a close run thing. Bear in mind, at this time in American history, they still had votes in Congress for going to war, not like today where the president will just authorize it. And when they go to war, they do have more options besides Canada. Indeed, having more objectives. It's only by having many objectives that they can convince enough people to subscribe to the war. Occupying Canada is one. You mentioned ending impressment. Alongside that, they also want to open up trade with Europe, and they want to stop British control, stop Britain being able to willy-nilly occupy and take over American ships, or confiscate their cargo. And you mentioned, of course, impressment as well. Impressment wasn't targeted at Americans; it was targeted at British sailors finding British deserters on their ships. But Americans from a certain point of view, were often caught up in it. I say in a certain point of view because there were many sailors who were both American and British, depending on your point of view. At this time in British history, your British nationality was forever. You actually couldn't give up your British nationality. So if you were born British, you were forever British. Now, there was loads of people in America, not only on ships but in their armies, who could who could be described as British if you wanted to, right? So I actually would say that there's 5 American war aims: end impressment, open up trade with Europe, okay, which is blocked because of the blockade of Europe. The British have a policy called the Orders in Council, which is preventing American trade with Europe as a way of starving the French economy. Okay, that's and then thirdly, end British control of the sea, so they're not confiscating their cargo. Because actually, in the years leading up to it, they often had British ships in American waters. There was a famous case of HMS Leander, formerly of Trafalgar fame, being outside New York and stopping their ships even as they just come out of New York Harbor and confiscating cargo on saying this cargo is going to go to France, so we're taking it. And then also there's the Indians. The Americans had this idea that the British were supporting the Indians in the Northwest. And when we say Northwest here, we mean the Northwest of Ohio and then into Indiana and Michigan. And the Indians there were indeed our allies, mostly. They did indeed have material from us, though it's worth noting that in 1811, after the Battle of Tippecanoe, it's an American victory over the Indians before the War of 1812 begins, they found British material in the Indian camp, but there was also American material there because, of course, the Indians are buying from all sorts all over the place, getting the material they can lay their hands on. But in any case, that is one of the things Madison mentions in his declaration of war. They want to stop the British supporting the Indians. Actually, because the debate over war and the political tension is so drawn out, really from 1807 is when it really starts getting really tense. So from that 5-year period, 1807 to 1812, the authorities in Canada, more than London, the authorities on the ground in Canada start increasing their cooperation with the Indians, which probably does embolden the Indians. But the reason they're increasing their support is because they believe the Americans will attack them, right? So the tension between London and Washington causes York, Upper Canada, to increase its cooperation with the Indians, thereby increasing tensions with the Americans in the West, thereby increasing support for war in Western United States. So it has this negative feedback, right? So continuously increasing that tension. So of those I mentioned, those 5 points, which ones do they achieve? Do they end impressment? Actually, no, they do not. Impressment ends sort of naturally because the great naval conflict with France comes to an end during the course of the War of 1812, right? For reasons independent of what's going on in North America. Do they open up trade with Europe? Well, actually, this is one of the tragic elements of the War of 1812. Just before Madison declares war on June the 18th, just mere weeks before, London decides to end the Orders in Council and open up trade between America and Europe. Okay, and but the Americans don't find out because, of course, of the distances involved at this time. So they don't find out until after they declared war. So already that point is no longer. No longer relevant, yet it was a massive motivating force for the declaration of war. Do they end British control of the seas? Absolutely not. Of course they do not. In fact, this is the beginning of this era of Britain's absolute supremacy of the sea for the rest of the 19th century, really. Do they put a stop to British support for Indians and defeat the Indians? Well, now this one, yeah, the Indians do badly out the war. So this one, we could give to them. I'm talking in the details of how that happens, but that's one we can put a tick by. Do they occupy Canada? No. In fact, their own territory is occupied. As this war ends, they have a slither of territory just over the river from Detroit. But that's actually, at that same time, there's considerably more American territory in British hands. So of their 5 objectives, okay, they get one. They get one out of the war. And another one was acquired before the war began, but they didn't know. So it's kind of a funny one. Now, compare with the British. The British don't have that very complicated list of objectives. Actually, for the British, it's very simple. They want to defend Canada and maintain their naval supremacy. No concessions on any of the naval issues. They don't want to end impressment. They don't want to end their right to claim their own people, their own flesh and blood for their navy. Okay, and on both of these points, they win. Now, however, during the course of the war, they become more interested in the Indian question. London starts taking interest in this, and they acquire a third objective, which is an Indian buffer state between the United States and Canada, which would be in Michigan and Wisconsin. And actually, very quickly in the negotiations in the Lower Netherlands, in Belgium, they give up on this one. It's just not that important. It's the last objective they consider, and it's the first one they jettison. Okay, so that's my summarization of the objectives. I think it's quite complicated set of objectives on the American side. I think that's what makes it possible to look back on the war and think, okay, yeah, it wasn't all bad. We got something out of it, and that's maybe not a small thing from an American point of view, but it's a small thing from a British point of view. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of viewed it as like, I guess what the term would be manifest destiny, right? You know, like the westward drive.
Mm.
I've always viewed it as that the colonists who were the ones that became, patriots, sons of liberty, and who would go on to, um, you know, uh, because during the revolution, of course, there were attempts during that time. I believe even Washington went up to Canada. There were patriot forces in Canada, what is now Canada, and it was viewed, by some in America, that this was like the unfinished business, and this was the destiny of America, that they would, free the rest of the colonies, um, of Upper and Lower Canada. And because of the, as you said, because there was no great uprising, and there was a book I've been going through, uh, on this. I mean, there are many reasons. I mean, the belief was that the French Canadians in particular would be more open to it, but because of the revolutions in France, particularly the anti-clerical aspects of it, there was this slight, I guess, hesitant, um, uh, reaction to it, particularly the more Catholic elements. And
Oh,
so
sure.
that
I'm
sort
sorry,
of,
can I interject here? Like, they should have known better by this point, because they had the same idea in the Revolution, and they marched up to Canada, and the French Canadians turned up to fight them. And so they marched up again in 1812, and the French Canadians turned up to fight them. Like, this is just like a fantasy that existed in some of their minds.
yeah, it's a very they did this happened twice.
Mm.
And I think after, the War of 1812, Manifest Destiny was like, okay, well, we'll forget about Canada and we'll just go westwards. Um,
And
and
South. Bear in mind that one of
oh, well, yeah, south.
Jefferson pre-war was expecting that if they go to war with the British, they're also going to grab Florida, right? Because they haven't got East Florida yet, which is actually the modern state of Florida. They've acquired West Florida already. Jefferson acquired that in his presidency, but they also expect to fight the Spanish, because Spain is Britain's ally at this point.
Yes.
But it doesn't happen anyway, but still, they eventually get it anyway. They get it after the war in 1812. But actually, I mean, you mentioned the Louisiana Purchase earlier. At this point, America is kind of prodding in all directions and seeing what sticks. Okay, they prod the Spanish, okay, and they see if they get something there. They prod the French, they see if they get something there. They do. They get the Louisiana Purchase, and then how they prod the British. I mean, they're open-minded about their expansion opportunities.
Yes. Um, so I see, just a quick one. So we've talked a bit about the sort of conflict and the sort of war goals aspect. I want to talk about a bit of the origins here. So after the um American independence, you did have, and as we'll see here, you can see on the map here. So you had it was particularly Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. There was this shift westward. There, of course, you had like the rebound, or the reboundaries of states. I remember you had like it was a wanted to call it a Jefferson state, but it was called Kentucky. You have uh, Tennessee. And actually, we'll talk about the natives very quickly. So I would say in this map, the light blue area represents the natives. So up here you had like Tecumseh's Confederation, and down here in Alabama, particularly in Alabama, you have the Cree, who we will talk about because they do play quite an important role um, in this conflict, and particularly from the American point of view. But um, this area of the Louisiana Purchase, so this was um, under Jefferson, I believe. This was under Jefferson, and this purchase. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because originally the plan was just to purchase the uh, uh, was it like New Orleans, and the sort of the whole purchase kind of price wasn't for like the whole of like the interior of North America, near enough.
Yes, I believe I'm not sure about that actually. That I don't know if you're familiar with that. Then I will take your word for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell, but I in I was going to say one of the books I was reading on the War of the 1812, which sort of touched upon it. It alludes to the fact that the initial plans by the American government before going over to their diplomats over to France to negotiate this, they just wanted like the New Orleans territory, like the more like trading port city area, and then they came back with actually the entire um, territory of French Louisiana, which is what we see on screen here.
That's
I mean,
interesting. There was, well, I'll add something to that then. Sorry to interject, but there was also an attempt by the Americans. I don't think it was Jefferson himself, but someone in his administration to claim that the Louisiana Purchase implicitly, despite actually saying it, included the Spanish Floridas, both West and East Florida. There was an attempt to make that claim after the event that that if it was implicit in the treaty, even if it wasn't explicitly said in the treaty. Now, this was actually mocked by opponents of the administration. And there were opponents to expansion in the United States, or at least to over rapid expansion, as some of them saw it. And that didn't stick, though they did end up occupying West Florida. Any case, they ended up basically just moving in and taking it over. But they were quite opportunistic in their approach to expansion, which I can understand given the state of the world at the time. And we have to understand the world is a complete turmoil, right? We're going through the Napoleonic Wars. It's funny to think, America is a very young country, and for most of its history as an independent country up to the year of 1812, Europe is in absolute turmoil, and so it's not really surprising that at this time that they're trying to take these opportunities for expansion. And the Louisiana Purchase that does contribute to the War of 1812, or at least to tensions between the British and Americans in some interesting ways. For example, under the treaties we'd made with the Americans after the war, we still were able to involve ourselves in some trade in the American Northwest. We evacuated.
Hello.
The Americans said, well, actually, we want to sail up the Mississippi because it's American now. Because that's another Jay Treaty will apply to the Mississippi River. And the Americans said no, because it wasn't part of America at the time. That's not part of the treaty. And so they have more access to the fur trade. That's the big one than we do. And so that increased the desire of the Indian Department in Canada and the British people working with the Indians, who are often married to Indians, to push the Indians to fight the Americans, thereby increasing that general tension.
No, absolutely. And it's important. I was going to say, I missed out. One important detail was that Jefferson um, sent James Monroe and Robert R. Livingston over to France to negotiate this purchase, and it looks it's interesting. I've just been going over the book. I have reading between the lines. I think James Monroe and Robert Livingston may have gone a bit rogue and just done the whole purchase. Just went a bit rogue with the purchase.
Really?
And I think what happened was just to avoid embarrassment. Um, Jefferson just sort of owned it. It was like, oh yeah, that was my plan all along, sort of thing. Even though, because it was quite unpopular in the United States, and there were in Congress, for example, it's quite interesting. There were, but particularly like from the Federalist side, there was like, well, these people are not like Anglos. I mean, so the French-speaking population in New Orleans on the coast there in the sort of city port areas, well, they're predominantly Catholic. They're not Anglos, and so that like they were saying, well, how would they integrate into society, into our English-speaking society, predominantly Protestant society? That was one. Um, and the second point that they tried to argue is actually the territory belonged to Spain, because it briefly was Louisiana was briefly. Oh, excuse me, sorry. It their argument was that actually that territory was technically Spanish, and I
Yeah.
think I don't know what authority I want to say they wanted to use like the papal edict, like of Toledo or something like that. Something.
It was Spanish. It was given to Spain in compensation for the loss of other territory. Um, if I remember correctly, after the end of the 7 Years' War, when we conquered
Oh,
Quebec,
okay.
basically we kicked them out, French out of North America. The French had controlled Louisiana up to that point,
Oh, yes, yes.
and it had been then given to Spain as a sop for their other losses. Okay, and also a way of like meeting a middle ground. So we don't take it, but the French can't have it. Okay, so that was that was, if I remember correctly, that's how that went down. Now Napoleon forced Spain to give it back, right? So the I think the authority there was quite weak. Yeah, and I want to point out something about this massive territory that it is. And you mentioned, oh, we're just looking for New Orleans. Well, New Orleans is the bit that you actually, that anybody who's with a white face actually ran, right? Going up all the way up the Mississippi, yeah, it's like a paper claim. You know, it's where they're trading. It's not where they're actually settled in large numbers.
Well,
Even New
I mean,
Orleans itself is small by the standards of the eastern seaboard of the United States. And it's kind of, it made me laugh a little bit. It's funny to me. You mentioned how that they don't think they can integrate the French and stuff. Because we had the same. It's funny because we mentioned already how the Americans went into Canada expecting the French to rebel. We went to New Orleans at the end of the war, expecting a similar thing. Oh, this would be the place we can go. We can go fight here because there's unruly French there who won't want to side with the American Protestants. Well, we're wrong. We're both wrong, right? The Americans were wrong about the French in Canada. We're wrong about the French in New Orleans because it turns out French colonists in America will basically fight for whoever's in charge if they think they can get a good deal out of it.
yes. And wasn't there also like in Louisiana that a lot of the French-speaking population there were expelled from French Arcadia, which is
That's
Nova
right.
Scotia.
Yes,
So
yes, that's
yeah.
right. They made way for a British settlement on the maritime provinces of Canada. That's right. That goes back a long way. That'd be 100 years previous by this point.
Yeah, so I do wonder. I imagine maybe that some of that might have played in as well into
Maybe,
like
but
the
they had to
case and my.
negotiate. Andrew Jackson, I mean, one of his qualities was his charisma and being able to win allies. And he won allies from the what they call it, the Baraton Pirates or something. I forget, they have a fancy name, but basically there's an island outside New Orleans, and it was just like a pirate stronghold, one of the last great pirate strongholds of
Oh
Atlantic history.
yeah,
Right, and
the
he got them
la-
to sign up to fight with him. They didn't
Yeah,
trust the Americans before, but they
I,
liked Andrew Jackson.
yeah. Who was the what was it, like Lafayette or something like that? That was the name of the was that the name of the pirate I'm thinking of?
No, that's Lafayette. I
Oh
don't
no,
think
not
so.
Lafayette.
Lafayette's the name of the guy from the Revolution, the Frenchman, the French
Yeah, no,
aristocrat.
sorry, no, no, yeah, no, no. I'm trying to think of the name, but yeah, he was
The name will be out there. Yeah, I can search
yeah,
if you like.
sorry, the name will get to me. Oh, it was in the book called Buccaneer, actually. That's what I'm thinking of. He was uh sort of figuring that. Anyway,
Lafitte. That's why you're thinking Lafayette. It's very close.
oh,
Lafitte.
yeah, sorry, Lafitte. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Wow, it's got a
Um,
great picture. I got to share this. I'll share this. I'll download this picture. I'll share this picture. This picture is amazing. What? He looks like he's from the wrong century. He really looks like he's from the wrong century. Amazing. This guy is one swanky chap. Let's take a look at this chap because he's quite something. Oh, he's quite something. Start
if you can
sharing. Look at this guy. He looks like he's from the 17th century.
That looks like one of my university professors, actually. It looks like he looks like one of my university professors without even got like that sort of like that sort of disdain, grumpy look on him. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's yeah. Oh wow. Yeah, it looks like yeah, more like 17th century sort of
Indeed, yeah, it gives me
thing
that
going
vibe.
on. Yeah,
Oh, they have their own
interesting.
fashions, I guess, over in New Orleans.
Yeah, so maybe a bit cut off, you know, so they're a bit cut off from society, you know, the latest fashion in society. Yeah, so I mean, you know, this is the purchase. The Federalists weren't in favor of this, but it was all ratified and passed in Congress and in the Senate. And it, the Federalists, and so you have these two political factions. You have the Federalists and the Democratic Republican Party. And I be correct in saying that this is kind of where the first North-South split starts to begin?
Well, I would say America was born with a North-South split. That was from
Well,
day one.
yeah,
Colonial
yeah,
America had a North-South split. Uh, in the Revolution, I'm not sure how that played into the Revolution, but certainly in their colonial history, uh, no question about it, because you've got two focal points of Anglo settlement with a more multi-ethnic center from New York down to New Jersey, and then in the Chesapeake, you've got a certain type of Englishman, and in Massachusetts, you've got another kind of Englishman, quite different kind of Englishman. So I think they've always had that. It was like built in from the beginning.
yeah. And so, I mean, like the South, you would have more like Ulster, Scott,
From the 18th century, sure, yeah.
yeah, Cavan, what
But
they
I'm
call
saying
like
from the beginning.
Cavendish.
I mean, like from Jamestown and from
Oh yeah,
Plymouth Rock, when they're much more English at that time. In the 17th century, most settlement in America is into the English colonies is English, and then you get the also Scots turning up in the 17th century. Sorry, towards the end of the 17th century, because our plantations in Ireland are not that successful, and so some of them just leave. So they're not in Ireland for very long. Of some of these people, but then in the 18th century, you get big, massive waves of then people from Ireland, including lots of Scots Irish, as the Americans call them. But just because of from day one, from 1607, right, from Jamestown, the type of people you get in Jamestown, the type of people you get in Massachusetts are so different that it's not surprising that they're very different people, right? Jamestown, from the beginning there to make cash, right? And whereas from Massachusetts, from the beginning, you have political idealists, people that decided, okay, we're going to establish this company. On paper, it looks like it's the same kind of idea as Jamestown, but we're actually going to move there. Like the people who actually run the company are going to live there. So it's from the beginning born with this self-governing ethos. So yeah, it's not surprising that way. But then there's also the geography of the place, right? So New England had this maritime economy, commercial economy that ties it to Britain. In some sense, ironically, because it is the ideological, from a theoretical point of view, from an ideological point of view, it's the heart of the revolution. But and once the revolution done, they want to continue making money the way they know how, right? Which is on the seas, in trade, the carrying trade, supplying the West Indies, right? And they win from the Jay Treaty, a limited right to supply the West Indies. That's broken in the Napoleonic Wars, and they want it back, but they think it'd be achieved through concession, for negotiation. Whereas the South and the West of the country ultimately come around to fighting. I mean, I shouldn't bear in mind there's a geographic element. There is a partisan element too, because of course there are Southern Federalists, some very prominent ones. It is John Randolph of Roanoke, the famous site of our first settlement, failed settlement, who's a Virginian Federalist who famously declares in Congress that, I forget the quote now, but it's along the lines of, all we've heard here in this Congress is Canada, Canada, Canada. And he's a famous a popular figure for historians to quote among those who want to emphasize Canada as the origin of the war, as a motivation for the war, for the conquest of this agrarian land. That's how he saw the objectives of the Republicans.
Yeah, and no, true. And of course you had like Democratic Republicans. I think there was representatives in like places like Massachusetts.
For sure. Yes, for
and
sure. So it's overstate the geographic divide.
Yeah, because there was one instance where I think one of them was like there was a mob that like sort of beat him and kicked him like through the city streets or something like that.
Standard American politics, but the worst one is Baltimore. Absolutely horrendous. Now Maryland, if I remember, I think it's pretty split. So they have, we've got to give credit to it's a partisan culture. It's not just like, oh, this region is this region is that. In Maryland, I believe the state government was Federalist, or at least not radically Republican. But Baltimore specifically had a violently radical Republican populace. I wanted to be clear, I'm not talking about the Republicans we have today. And you mentioned Republican. Sometimes it's been Republican - Democrat, but a lot of texts you read will just say Republican, right? Contemporary texts will just say Republican. And there was a Federalist paper in Baltimore, and this guy, the Federalist paper, and the journalist who ran it was arguing for peace in the United Kingdom and moderation in their negotiations with Britain. And they destroyed the building. They laid siege to it, okay? Even though he had the defense inside of a Revolutionary War veteran. I wish I could remember the name now, but it was a prominent Revolutionary War veteran, an officer. And he'd come to look after. He was also a Federalist from the Mid-Atlantic states. And they laid siege to it. They pulled these guys out and they abused them, brutalized them. The journalist was quite young, but the Revolutionary War veteran was an old guy, quite old, as I say, from the Revolutionary War. Some of the people they took out were tarred and feathered. So this is still a thing they're doing, right? So you associate with the revolution, but they're still doing it in War of 1812. And I got to say, something that looks like a minor revolutionary excess looks a lot worse, I think, when it's done in a country that's independent and shouldn't need to resort to this kind of atrocious treatment of your political opponents. They stab them and kick them and beat them, and some of them die. Some of the people involved die. The particular general, whose name I forget, the Revolutionary War officer, he after the event he goes to the Caribbean to recuperate. Goes to the British Caribbean, and he dies there. He doesn't recover. The journalist does survive, and he continues to publish Federalist newspapers, but he dies young. He never makes a full recovery. So their partisan politics could be, in some places, really horrible. really quite grim. So the country hasn't quite worked out how to do, if you're going to have a multi-party state, you have to work out some way of respecting each other to a certain point. And it's a funny thing because actually after the war they work out how to do that, at least for a while. And maybe not permanently, but it's famously followed by the era of good feelings, where the two parties aren't tarring and feathering each other. But at this time, they still haven't quite caught on how to do that. And neither have we, I suppose. But in any case, it's tougher for them because they have aspirations for greater democracy, electoral democracy, than we do. And this tarring and feathering, I just want to mention also, the outbreak of the war, on an American ship, they have loads of British sailors, right? And some of them don't want to fight the British, actually. We mentioned them as like deserters earlier. That's make it a little unfair. They're just going where the higher wages are, right? And some of them didn't want to fight the British, to fight their own country. And so some of them were held as prisoners and exchanged later. But there was one guy on Porter's ship. Porter is a good American captain, pretty good. He later famously raids the Pacific. I think he's one of the last people to actually know the war's over, because he's in the Pacific raiding British commerce. But he allows his men to tar and feather a man on his ship, which I personally find particularly repulsive. This guy's working his ship, and he just doesn't want to fight his own country, and then you treat him that way. And tar and feathering, it's not like some joke thing. I mean, hot tar burns off the top layer of your skin, right? And then it's not just a humiliation; it's a real torture. And I think it's hard for me to fully respect this guy, even though he's a decent captain from a military point of view, for allowing one of his own crew to be treated this way just because he doesn't want to fight his own country. So anyway, maybe I went off on that a bit, but it just puts in kind of context the level of animosity that existed in American politics.
No, 100%. And I mean, we'll talk about the sort of outbreak of the war on this, but somebody in chat just brought up a really interesting point. Of course, during the U.S. Civil War, Maryland was nominally part of the Union, but particularly more on the, I guess, more the sort of that peninsula area. There was Confederate support. I mean, you did have Confederate support in the north, in pockets of the North Shore, but again, sort of history mirroring itself again. You find, and one thing I will add quickly, because we'll talk about just on the far bit of the Federalists. I mean, yeah, the Federalists, particularly their areas, was New England, predominantly New England. At the heart was New England, so you're looking at Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and you did have the depending on the elections, it did stretch down into Massachusetts, support Massachusetts, and particularly in Boston, itself, because of their the trade with Britain, right, and you had the financial, and also yes, there's the societal aspect of it as well. But one thing that, and this is when I was doing my research in this, is how they refused to send troops to the federal effectively the federal government for this war. Governor space. I mean, it's you just thinking about it, just saying it's kind of ridiculous, because that's surely just like treason, isn't it?
Well, it's the Republicans' fault. It's absolutely the Republicans' fault, because the Republicans pre-war, until late 1811, okay, when after the Battle of Tippecanoe, they decided, okay, we're going to try and get funding from Congress for increase the army, but even that's a challenge. The Republicans had an ideological opposition to the U.S. Army. More so to the U.S. Navy, actually. They believe there should be an army, but the Jeffersons and his people, they didn't trust Navy and global commerce. But even with the army, they believed, and their ideology, their propaganda was that the revolution was won by the militia. not the Continental Army. Okay, and they bigged up the militia strongly, and so they encouraged states to have more militia and weren't as interested in the U.S. Army. Not all of them. I'm speaking quite broad strokes here because some of them understood. Okay, Henry Clay, for example, is one of the most famous war hawks. He's a Republican, and he understood if I'm engaging on this in this personal crusade to get us to go to war with Britain, then I also in Congress need to support funding for the regular U.S. Army and for the Navy. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, he's a consistent and sensible war hawk. But the party as a whole, they could be talked around to war, but couldn't necessarily talk around past their mythology. Okay, which is that the militia is how you beat the British. You just send militia to fight them. Militia have a right not to leave their state. Actually, this is inherited from us. Our militia at this era didn't have to leave the British Isles. Now, lots of militia did go to the Peninsula Campaign, but they had to be pressured into it, volunteered into it, and join regular regiments. Okay, so that's actually, in some sense that's similar, but we didn't attempt to invade Spain, for example, with the militia. We just had to get the guys from the militia into the regular regiments, right? And for example, as an example, the best memoir we have of a regular soldier in the War of 1812 is Shadrach Byfield. He was a militia guy from Wiltshire who volunteered for the regular regiments and so went to fight in North America rather than Spain. So because of this ideological problem, they bigged up the militia. The militia would refuse not only to invade Canada, but sometimes they'd refuse to cross state lines. Okay, so it's actually worse. It'd be like our militia refusing to cross county lines. I mean, it's awful. Often they could be talked to cross state lines, but then you'd go up. Yeah, you get to the border with Canada. Okay, so in the 1812, you've got they march up. You've got this map here. You can see there where they march up from Connecticut up to the border of Canada, from the easternmost campaign on land. Yeah, they get there, and these chaps just they won't do it. They won't do it. Bear in mind, okay, this map is showing campaigns from different years. Okay, but even in the first year, you've got 3 simultaneous attempts to invade Canada, 3 movements northward, and but the most embarrassing one is the East, because basically it doesn't fight. Later they will, but in 1812, the army there just we're not going. Like, my job is to defend my state. This is the state border. I'm not going any further. Absolute disaster. Now, of course, in the West, they do go fight, but it doesn't go well when they fight either. Now, they have another type of unit. Sorry, they've got regulars, they've got militia, they've also got something called volunteer regiments, and these are guys who, a bit like our militia, who you can talk them into volunteering, but it's for the work of the war. But then there's another issue: how long do they serve for? Well, the volunteer regiments, the terms of service vary, but it's usually like 6 months or a year, or in some cases until the end of the war, but not often it's just 1 year. The militia is even less. It can be months, like 3 to 6 months in some cases. So even if they turn up, and even if they'll march with you, you're on a ticking time bomb all the time. You have to engage quickly because your guys are going to go home. And they do go home. They do go home. And America, as the war goes on, they have to resolve this, right? Because the embarrassments they suffer in the first year. This is all, I mean, anyone now looking back would know this is not the way to do it, but because they have so much baggage from the revolution, right? Too many stories of the militia repelling the British. And it's not that it's bullshit. It's just that militia might be really good defending their home, but they're not designed for conquering a vast country like Canada. Yeah, it's the wrong job. And so they have to evolve. They have to evolve this, and they end up. I wish I had the data handy. Maybe I do. I can find it. I'll say it later. But they end up hanging a lot of people. Okay, they have to start hanging people. At the beginning, they really, again, it's the type of thing that they're adverse to. Okay, they're adverse to hanging their guys for desertion because they think, oh, that's not what it is. We're free people, right? One more feature. I know I went on a bit, but there's one more feature about this I have to mention. The volunteer regiments, the ones who are kind of in between the regulars and the militia, they elect their own commanders. Can you believe it? For me,
this is not this. Sorry, but that's the nonsense that occurred on the in the Spanish Civil War on the Republican side, with particularly with the anarchists and communists.
Exactly the kind of comparison I made in my head. I was thinking, are we talking about communists here, man? Come on. It's the type of nonsense you get in extremely radical revolutionary situations. But that's what the Americans went through, right? So we shouldn't. Okay, I know the way I'm talking about it is like I'm incredulous. It's ridiculous, but I suppose every revolution has to have a certain amount of bullshit attached to it, right? It's not unique to them. Okay, it's this, and then eventually you have to, like in the English Revolution, we had plenty of bullshit too, and then eventually you get the Putney debates, and Cromwell decides, well no, we're not going to implement extreme radical utopianism. We're going to still be a normal country. And the Americans needed to go through that process too, and in some ways, the War of 1812 helps them do that.
Was there American general? Was there like some American leader like Andrew Jackson or someone like that who sort of bitch slapped all these radicals back to reality or something?
In the South, it would be Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is interesting because he doesn't fight the British until the very end of the war, right? He mostly
South,
the Indian fighter. The chap in the North who deserves special mention on the American side is Winfield Scott. Now, Winfield Scott would go on to play a massively important role in the conquest of Mexico. Well, the defeat of Mexico. He literally conquers them. I mean, he's one of the guys who lands in the central part of Mexico and conquers that, and then forces them to cede northern Mexico to the United States. And then he's also important as an advisor to Lincoln in the first part of the Civil War. So he's a hugely important character. And you will see, if you study this war in detail, on the American side, actually, you can make a comparison with the Canadian and British side. The Canadian-British guys who do well often kind of fade into obscurity because Canadian history kind of just ticks along after this. This is the high drama. This is it to some extent.
High drama.
The American side, the guys involved, they go on to big things. Two presidents serve in this war. Two future presidents. A bunch of candidates for presidency serve in it or are in Congress in it, and men who end up leading the entire U.S. Army, namely Winfield Scott, serve in it. So a lot of people, and that's not to mention governors and stuff like this, right? So a lot of people make their career. A lot of people in the first year ruin their career. Okay, so they have to go through that process. They got these guys who were like, they were young in the revolution, and now they're a bit long in the tooth, and they were good at leading militia to defend their home state, but don't know how to invade a foreign country. They have to get their asses kicked. And then once they're out of the way, the Americans are able to fight respectably. Still not with dramatically successful results, but they can at least put on a good show by the end of the war, for sure.
It says here, Winfield Scott was also known as Old Fuss and Feathers because of his insistence on proper military etiquette.
Oh, yes. Yes, proper army guy. So he didn't have any truck with he wasn't interested in militia. Look, he saw how militia performed. He was at Queenston Heights, where the American army, large numbers of American soldiers were surrendered and hiding in the bushes. And when the battle was over, they just surrendered. And large numbers of them captured by the British had to be exchanged later. He after that was exchanged, and he continued, and he raised a very good. He led a regiment in the regular U.S. Army, and he trained them like proper soldiers. It's like, no, you're not here to show how free you are. You're here to fight a war as a proper soldier. You have discipline. We're going to flog you if you're not behaving. We'll hang you if you desert, and you're going to wear. Your uniform is going to be swanky. They're the wrong color. They're going to be gray. So this is the origin of gray in North American military, because you couldn't get hold of any blue uniforms, so they wore gray. And but you're going to be super disciplined. You're going to fight basically like the British. You're going to do what you're told. And if I tell you to march towards cannon, we're going to march towards cannon. And what happens to these guys? Well, lots of them die, but that's because they're brave. That's because they're disciplined. That's because the British, when they see them, this is towards the end of the war now, so maybe I'm getting a bit ahead. But you have the Battle of Chippewa, which is American victory. It's followed, as most offensive victories in this war, it's then followed by a defeat or a stalemate. But in any case, this battle was a win, and they're going into Canada, and Winfield Scott. There's the British line on a ridge. They got the high ground, but my boys, they're disciplined. We're going to march forward. And the British commander, He said, "Oh, these guys, they're in grey. It must be militia. Don't worry about it. We're gonna be fine. They're gonna break like all the other American militia who tried to invade Canada, and they did usually break American militia in offensive duty. But actually, once they start moving forward, the British commander's like, oh god, these guys are disciplined. These guys are regulars. He can see it and how they're walking, and they perform great. Lose them die. In the next battle, followed after Clune, is the Battle of Lundy Lane, and more of them die. Like large numbers of them died, possibly unnecessarily, but they died in a disciplined way, and that's what matters.
Yes. If you don't mind, I think we're just going to talk about the British side in this now, because we've sort of gone over the American points here. So with Britain, so the War of 1812 kicked off in July, and it has dawned on me that the Prime Minister of Britain back in June, uh, Spencer Perceval,
Sorry,
oh sorry,
sorry,
Percival, sorry,
June. It started in June 18th.
oh, sorry, so it started in June. Okay, so
At least that's the
oh,
declaration of war, and then there's a bit of a delay. And if yes, I think your point about Spencer Percival, I will just interject briefly about the very beginning of the war, because the Americans declared war on June 18th, but who starts fighting first? At sea, the Americans start fighting first because the British have already rescinded the orders in council as the blocking American trade with Europe, and they're hoping that if we say the Navy don't do anything yet, then the Americans will say, "Oh, okay, peace of honor, no problem," or have peace. They're hoping for a negotiated settlement. So the Navy loses the initiative on the British side, and then the American Navy. That's not the only reason the American Navy do well, but it's one reason. On land, amazingly, the first people to start on the offensive is Britain. Actually, they get the news of the declaration of war, and Isaac Brock straight into action, straight into activity, and he starts seizing territory. First, Micklemore Island in the western Great Lakes, which is a key strategic point for access to the Indians and the fur trade. Hugely important win, and it convinces more Indians to serve on the British side. When the British turn up there, Isaac Brock wasn't there personally; he dispatched them. The Americans don't know they're at war because it's hard to fathom this, but you've got to understand this is America's first offensive war. So we've got to understand that like, I don't be condescending either, but they messed this up. They didn't tell them. They didn't tell their guys in the West they're at war. It's kind of hard to grasp how silly that is, but it is a fact. So the guys in the center of the administration, and of course the distances are huge, right? I mean, and it doesn't help. There's a chap called Astor, something Astor. I forget his first name. He's involved in the fur trade in cooperation with Canadians, and as soon as he's in Washington or Virginia, close enough, and as soon as he knows war's happening, he rushes off to Canada to try and see if he can use his personal influence to negotiate peace. And in the process, make sure it just guarantees everyone in Canada knows they're at war, right? So the Canadians are like, well, the British and the authorities in Canada are like strict sanction. The performance in their first opening stages are, phenomenal in that regard. And so they actually, bizarrely, the Americans are on the defensive in the first few months of the war in the Western campaign. In the Eastern campaign, the British aren't really doing anything, and that's lucky. That's okay because the Americans also just won't. The militia won't cross the border, so that's fine. They just go home by themselves. So I just wanted to interject for that. But Percival, that's a funny story.
Yeah, he was assassinated. Not for anything like great political reasons. The only prime minister to be assassinated.
For shame.
No, careful now. Careful
Okay,
now.
okay. Sorry. For shame that he was assassinated. Sorry.
No, we understand. We get it. Yeah. So, and he was assassinated by an individual. I believe it was over the Corn Laws. It was something just over the Corn Laws. It wasn't like a radical French plot or radical Irish Catholic or
Boring
anything.
old economics.
Basically, boring old econ reasons. And as a result, you had the Earl of Liverpool succeeded him as prime minister, and shortly thereafter, war breaks out, and so the response from London to the likes of Isaac Brock and uh, uh, George Prevost is basically that you just have to operate on a defensive, just operate as a defensive in the colonies.
Yes, and that suits Prevost. And Prevost is not a man cut of the heroic cloth, but he is a decent colonial commander. It's it's hard in a war that gives us Isaac Brock, gives us Tecumseh on the American side, gives us Winfield Scott and Andrew Jackson. Some of these are quite impressive, charismatic, aggressive figures. And next to them, Prevost is, I don't know, your boring uncle. He just wants to sit by the fireplace. But actually, he was a talented guy. He was important in patching up relations with the French. Now it's interesting, actually, that he hadn't been the control of Canada that long. He was preceded by a guy called Craig, who who was quite important for allowing the Indian Department basically to do what they want with the Indians, which basically meant the Indians were going to be on our side in the war because the Indian Department guys were themselves itching for a fight with the Americans. Many of them were former settlers of New York and Pennsylvania, by the way. So they were guys married to Indian wives who kind of old now, or the sons of guys who'd fought in the Revolutionary War on the loyalist side, and wanted another scrap. So the Indians were on our side thanks to Craig to some extent, and then on the Prevost was a Francophile. Well, I think he was Swiss-born. I think he was actually half Swiss or something. He spoke French like a native speaker, and he just communicated well with the French. Craig had alienated the French, and Prevost quite quickly won them over. And that's going to be important because the French are going to turn up to fight, and they're going to beat the French back, Chateauguay, and other battles. So that's great. Okay, so from a colonial governor point of view, he's a splendid chap. He's very defensive. But you know what? For the whole war, we have less men on the ground and less resources. Canada doesn't produce anything, right? Everything has to be brought from elsewhere. So, and except furs. Okay, yeah, you can't fight a war just on furs. So, so it's actually pretty good. He balances with Isaac Brock. Isaac Brock pushes the limit of every order to be as aggressive as he can. And sometimes Prevost's chagrin, but he does it amazingly because he's very talented. Unfortunately, he dies, and dies like a British officer marching up to the high ground where the Americans are because they have to remove them somehow. And if the men went by themselves, I'm going to lead them from the front, and that's how he dies at Queenston Heights. He still wins. He wins, but he dies.
Yes, fate of many great British commanders as well. I do want to read the proclamation by Isaac Brock on, I guess, notifying the province of Upper Canada of
it's a great
war.
One. Yeah, good.
Yeah, of war and what he expects those in the province to do. So I've got it here, and this is the actual one. So I'm gonna if people will not know the English at the time, sort of the spelling. So I've just been going through it. So if you do read it, I'm trying to bring up the screen, but it's not allowing me. But if you do read it, you'll find where you have certain letters like S, it's actually changed into F. So people who aren't familiar with English or that sort of style, that if you're looking at it and you think, oh, the spelling seems a bit odd, that's what it is. It's not you, don't worry. That's just how it was then. So I'll give it a start. So it begins with proclamation, Province of Upper Canada, Isaac Brock, Esquire, President, administrating the government of the province of Upper Canada, and Major General commanding His Majesty's forces within our said province. To all to whom these presents shall come, greetings. Whereas on the 17th day of June last, the Congress of the United States of America declared that war then existed between those states and their their territories and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, the dependencies thereof, and whereas in uh, pursu- um, pursuance of such declaration, the subjects of the United States have actually committed hostilities against the uh, possessions of His Majesty and the uh, possessions and properties of his subjects in this province. Now, therefore, by and with the advice of His Majesty's Executive Council in the affairs of the province, I do hereby strictly enjoin the require all His Majesty's liege subjects to be obliged to the lawful authorities to forbear all communications with the enemy or persons uh, residing within the territory of the United States, to uh, manifest their loyalty by a zealous cooperation with His Majesty's Armed Forces in defense, in defense of the province, and uh, uh, repel of the enemy. And I do further require and
Are you
command
there, sir?
all. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh
Am
dear. Oh
I
dear. I
am
don't hear
I
you. Why would
can't you
that
hear
be?
me? Hello?
Is it me?
Can you hear me? Oh, fuck's sake.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me? Is anyone in chat can hear me? Oh, have I gone totally. Hold on a sec. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello. I think I can hear you now.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened there. I must have an issue with my internet, and it then reset my speaker to my microphone. I do beg your pardon. Did you finish the proclamation?
No, I didn't get. I heard
So
that you didn't
sorry.
hear
I'm
me.
so sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Interrupt you.
I'll just I'll just go back to I'll just go to back to the last section here. So the continuing proclamation, and I do further require and command all officers, civil and military, to be vigilant in the discharge of their duties, especially to prevent all communication with the enemy and to cause all persons suspected of treacherous intercourse to be apprehended and treated according to the law. Given under my hand and seal at arms at York, in the province of Upper Canada, the 6th day of July, in the year of our Lord, 1812, and in the 52nd year of His Majesty's reign, Isaac Brock, President, Upper Canada. So there we go.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, maybe this is a good moment to talk about Upper Canada. Maybe actually, maybe I could we could compare for a second with General Hull. Also made a proclamation to the Canadians. I think I have that here. Let me see if I got that. So General Hull is the guy whose job it is basically to go fight Brock. So he's on the western in the western theater. He's going to be in Detroit, and his job is to cross over into Canada. The opposite of Detroit is Amherstburg, which is where. But Brock's gonna come first. Well, let me just read the beginning of his book. I'm not gonna read the whole thing; it's long. Inhabitants of Canada, after 30 years of peace and prosperity, the United States has been driven to arms. The injuries and aggressions, the insults and indignities of Great Britain have once more left them no alternative but manly resistance or unconditional submission. The army under my command has invaded your country, and the standard of the United States waves on the territory of Canada. To the peaceful, unoffending inhabitant, it brings neither danger nor difficulty. I come to find enemies, not to make them. I come to protect you, not to injure you. Separated by an immense ocean and extensive wilderness from Great Britain, you have no participation in her councils, no interest in her conduct. You have felt her tyranny. You have seen her injustice. But I do not ask you to avenge the one or to redress the other. The United States are sufficiently powerful to afford you every security consistent with their rights and your expectations. I tender you the invaluable blessings of civil, political, and religious liberty, and their necessary result, individual and general prosperity. That liberty which gave decision to your councils and energy to our conduct in our struggle for independence, printed in all capitals, and which conducted us safely and triumphantly through the stormy period of the Revolution. I will skip a lit and just get to the bit where he mentions Indians, which I think is quite interesting here because it affects the results of the campaign a lot. If the barbarous and savage policy of Great Britain be pursued, I've skipped quite a lot of content, it's a long proclamation, and the savages are let loose to murder our citizens and butcher our women and children, this war will be a war of extermination. The first stroke with the tomahawk, the first attempt with the scalping knife will be the signal for one indiscriminate scene of desolation. No white man found fighting by the side of an Indian will be taken prisoner. Instant destruction will be his lot. So I won't read. There is a bit more, but the tone is quite different. Both of them go for a bit of a highfalutin language, but Hull makes some errors here, where Brock makes good choices, and the result, I think, for many people might be able to ascertain why, is the Canadians, the people in Upper Canada, do come around to the British side, and this makes Upper Canada. Yeah, well, it should be clear. This makes Ontario what's going to become Ontario. It makes it British. It might be worth noting. I'm sorry, I've interjected. Maybe you want to make other points about the first proclamation.
I was just going to say, I mean, yeah, in Brock's proclamation, it was basically like, listen, if you're talking with the enemy, we're going to. It basically said we're going to be attacked. If you collaborate or communicate with the enemy, you're just going to be treated as a traitor and you'll be executed. And that's kind of like, that's not, that's not like crazy level of tyranny. That's just normal in any society at that time. Yeah, it's not like some crazy level of tyranny or something like that.
And they will execute some people, actually. There will be something called the bloody assizes.
Assizes,
later in the war. Assize, sorry, beg your pardon, my pronunciation ignorance, but yes, that will come. That comes a bit later after Brock, because at this point, at the point of the proclamation I just read, Hull is on a Canadian soil, but not for very long. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that Hull sent off very quickly a contingent to take Macklemore Island, which is up in the north, where which are the lakes? Where Lake Michigan meets Lake Huron, just below Lake Superior. So this island, from that point, you can control the access to all three. And once he gets this news, he just without barely firing a shot in anger, just goes back to Detroit, which is, we should be clear, is a fort at this point, more than a city. And it's like 3/4 French speaking, actually, amazingly, at this time. Well, not amazingly, but that's the fact. Now, yes, if you commit treachery, you're going to get killed. Pretty common feature, but it's, it has to be mentioned, because Upper Canada at this time is 3/4 American. And now when I say American, I don't mean loyalists from the revolution. I mean, you've got about a fifth who are loyalists who came at the end of the revolution, and they are the bedrock of the administration, and they're the guys who are going to turn out as militia to fight alongside Brock, and Brock's going to sing their praises to high heaven because they're the guys who will fight for Canada, and then you've got about the remaining fifth is like the French and Indians, basically. But that 3/5 are recent Americans. Now, there was a term at the time, late loyalists. So they're loyalists, but they came a bit late. But it's not true. They turned up because land was cheap and taxes were low. No taxation without representation. Well, actually, the deal in Ontario was no representation and virtually no taxes. So we didn't have a very democratic establishment. We should bear in mind about Canada. It's a conquered province, right? We conquered it from the French. So it's not as developed politically as some of the other colonies were. Like some of our colonies in America were basically born democratic of a sort, or at least oligarchic with quite a wide bracket included in the oligarchy. But Ontario is not like that. It's run by a military governor, namely Brock, under another military governor, namely Prevost. But the land's cheap and the taxes are virtually non-existent, so Americans go there, and these are the guys they're worried about. And well, what mistake did Hull make in that proclamation I just mentioned? He just said, if you fight alongside the Indians, there will be no quarter given to you. So if you're a white unit with Indian allies, we're just going to kill you. Well, if you're a militiaman in the Canadian militiaman fighting the British Army, you don't get to choose what other units turn up to the battle, right? No one asked you if Tecumseh is going to be there, but he is going to be there. So once you see him there, that's it. You can't surrender. You have to fight hard. You know that you can't let the Americans catch you. Or if you're just a civilian, you're just a guy you don't want to join, which most of them don't want to fight. Most of them are apolitical. They're there for cheap land and no taxes. Okay, well, you've just been told that if you basically allow Indians to defend your home, or if you supply food or something, perhaps then the Americans are going to abuse you. Okay, so now these guys start thinking, wow, I feel upper Canadian now. I don't feel as American maybe as I once did.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that going back to what we said at the start of the stream is, if you look at I don't know the actual population numbers of Upper and Lower Canada. I imagine it's very sparsely populated compared
Tiny.
to very, very sparsely populated. But what you have is significant. I mean, so I know in Canada you have the excuse me, you have the what's called the Six Nations of the Grand River, which is basically like is like the huge sort of tribal confederations within Canada. So these are people actually in what is considered in the territories of modern day Canada. And then of course you have Tecumseh and everything, and you have the French Canadians, and then of course like the Anglo Canadians and loyalists and everything.
And then the Americans. I mean, don't count the
and
Americans.
Then the Americans. Yeah.
And the Americans and the British, basically. So there are Canadians today, presumably, who are loyal to the king and pro-Canadian, who may well have had ancestors who definitely had ancestors who were Yankees. No question.
Yeah, but my point in this is that they don't have a choice. No, because number one, the demographics on the ground is effectively, each side has a significant presence, but also on the military side, it's a skeleton. Like for the British, it's a skeleton crew there. It's a skeleton. Yeah. It is because the fighting, as we mentioned, Napoleonic front. I mean, what is it, about 6,000? I mean, you're including all the militiamen. What was it, 6,000? A force of 6,000, and that's not including the Indians in that.
Well, and most of that number, lots of troops who are just going to sit in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia for the entire war, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. It's worse than that even. Now, those guys in Nova Scotia and and whatnot. They're not going to fight, actually. Well, that's a little unfair, because there was a regiment of New Brunswick fencibles who march in winter through the snow to go join the war further west. So I don't be too harsh, but I'm not trying to be harsh at all. But there are troops who sit there on the border of New England waiting for something to happen, and virtually nothing happens because New England doesn't want to fight a war. Right, so
Yeah.
so that the numbers are horrendous, and that's why the Indians are so important. That's why because the war had such a long build up, because of the political tension, because Governor Craig, as the predecessor to Prevost, allowed the Indian Department to do what they want, and they allowed these guys like Matthew Elliott, who's an Irishman from Pennsylvania, loyalist, who then had to move to Canada after losing the Revolution. These guys, they wind the Indians up, and they become confidants of Tecumseh, Matthew Elliott in particular. But there's other chaps too. John Norton, who writes a very nice memoir of the war. He's half Scot, half Cherokee. It's chaps like this. The Indians are ready to go. The Indians are like, gnawing at the bit. Like, I want to go kill the Long Knives. The Long Knives is what they call the Americans. And so as soon as the war begins, you've got the ingredients you need for making use of small numbers to achieve a lot. You've got Isaac Brock. I said 1/5 the population of Upper Canada's these loyalists from the Revolution, but they're motivated. They're a motivated minority of guys who have decided they're going to decide the future of Upper Canada. This is the country they're going to make. So it doesn't matter that they're a minority. It doesn't matter that they're a small minority. They've decided we're the future. And they are the future. They're the people who are going to make this country called Canada. And then the third part of the ingredient is the Indians. Okay, the Indians are absolutely vital for the first campaign. Thoroughly vital. Brock, in his dash and his speed, he has that contingent, sees Macklemore Island to the north, and then Hull retreats because he's lost this island to the north. He's back over in Fort Detroit. Brock crosses over into American territory, lays siege to Fort Detroit, starts, bombarding it with cannons, and he calls Hull for negotiation. He says, "You surrender quickly, yeah, or I will lose control of my allies, and the Indians will slaughter every last person in there," which includes Hull's family. For some ridiculous reason, he brought members of his family with him, women with him. And so Hull just crumbles. He surrenders, and the whole and Detroit for a short time is it had previously already been a British fort because of the threat of the Indians. Because the Indians were there, they were able to fight, but also because the Americans were kind of scared of them. Actually, it's not to say they didn't think they could beat them in battle, but they were scared what happens after a battle if you lose.
And Hull, I mean Hull, he was wasn't it when he was on the evacuation of Fort Dearborn to Fort Wayne, was when he was attacked by what was it, Potawatomi
I'm
warriors?
sorry, that is because of him. He wasn't there.
He wasn't there. No,
that's the day before. So it's August the 16th for the surrender of Fort Detroit. The day before, Fort Dearborn. These are two different forts, both in the northwest. Okay.
Yeah, Dearborn.
Hull commanded Fort Dearborn to be evacuated because he believed the situation was hopeless. So it's a different location, but he was an overall commander. But he wasn't personally there.
So
you are quite right. The Indians are going to be pretty grim.
So hold on a sec. You have two forts. You have Fort Detroit and Dearborn, which are kind of, for the Americans, they are, on the lakes. They're quite important. I mean, let's be honest. They're very
Everything's
important.
in the lakes in this war.
Yeah, it's all in the lakes, so it's all important. It's the front line, and he's like, "No, evacuate." I mean, this seems like a really illogical knee-jerk reaction.
He had psychologically crumbled. Basil Littlehart, he wrote about the Great War. He said that he made his case, right, in the Great War, how important morale is. But morale, it's not what everyone imagines, like, oh, the regular soldier suddenly just won't follow orders and crumbles and runs away. That happens. But actually, morale is also in the leadership, the psychological strength of the leadership. And it's sad for Hull I think he was a Revolutionary War veteran. He had a good record. That's why he was there. But he was old. He was a family man. He was not popular with his troops because he was the wrong type of American. It's still very important in America at this point. At the point we're talking about, that he wasn't popular. The popular guy was Harrison. The Kentuckians in particular didn't like him for whatever reasons, their internal reasons, and they bullied him. Apparently, there was one moment where they troops. Oh, what was it? I think they removed the things holding together his rickshaw or something, so that he fell into a river and ruined his uniform and stuff like this. I mean, it's just silly stuff that a few floggings would have dealt with, but that wasn't the kind of military Americans had at this time. And he had women from his family with him, and he was in this fort, and he was terrified of his family being scalped, murdered, raped, sold off into slavery, whatever, by the Indians, right? So
I get. I mean, I get that, but I wouldn't have said that the Indians were trained or really. I mean, I understand that with the British we had the cannons, but I'm just looking at it and I'm like, okay, even if they sieged, I don't think the British had the capability to.
You are right. But sorry, Brock. This is Brock. We've got to go back to Brock, because Brock allowed a letter to be captured by the Americans, and the letter was written to appear to be a communication between British officers, but it actually was deliberately planted for the Americans to capture, and it massively overstated British numbers. So the Americans,
that's clever.
Yeah, very clever. Oh, Brock was great. Brock was phenomenal.
Oh no, I do I like Brock. Reading my I'll just give you the book actually, because this one, there's a good one for people to watch, to read. Sorry, and it's the War of 1812. The War with the United States: A Chronicle of 1812 by. Let me just bring up the author's. Let me just bring up the author's name. William Charles Henry Wood.
I'll write that down. That's what I'm typing. Sorry, we'll call that. William Charles Henry Woods. 4 names.
Yes.
All right, I will check that.
That's quite a good one, because the reason I like that one in particular was a lot of books obviously are from the American perspective. This one does cover Tecumseh and the British one, the British point of view, quite well, and actually is more inclined to be like, I mean, even he says at the start, it was a humiliating disaster for the America. Like for any conflict to begin, this is like a really, really bad start.
Yeah, particularly though there is irony, right? I mentioned earlier, for ideological reasons, the Republicans liked militia and distrusted the Navy. The Navy performs, and it's kind of sad for those guys, because the Navy do really well. The officers are enthusiastic, but they're all from like Federalist strongholds, right? They're all Mid-Atlantic or Northeasterners, nearly all of them, right?
Yeah.
So they're from the regions that don't really support the war. But that doesn't affect their motivation. I mean, they're guys who are enthusiastic to do a job. They know the British are the most famous Navy in the world, and they're excited, I think, motivated to prove their worth against them. And they do. I mean, they show in ship-to-ship actions that in the job of a sailor, they're decent. And so the Republican administration is forced into this embarrassing situation of they really want heroes, right? And this really comes through. I think this is an American trait going through history, actually. But I mean, I don't want to. I'm not an expert on the American mind, okay? But in any case, they want heroes, and the only heroes they got are at sea. So they're constantly like awarding golden swords and stuff like this, and medals and stuff to Navy commanders for the first 12 months. Well, really the first 6 months. But yeah, through the 12 months, we could say, just about. Because that's all they've got. Because everyone on land is screwed up. Hull's screwed up. Wilkinson's even more embarrassing. He's the guy who can't invade Canada because he can't invade his troops to move, but he himself is also incompetent. He's also in the employment of the Spanish government secretly, which later comes out. It's just ridiculous. These chaps they have left over from the revolution are just a mess, really.
Is it?
Um,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but these guys just sound like pure like proto violets, like just like dregs of the revolution. I mean,
yes,
they
they are.
shouldn't.
They are. They're really awful. Though, I mean, I don't want to, Hull was probably like a decent chap. So Wilkinson was literally a scoundrel. I think many Americans would wanted to have killed him. But he somehow had a charmed life. Literally, he was in the employ of the Spanish colonial government. He was receiving a salary from them secretly, and was involved in various secret schemes with them that came to nothing. But he was getting money from them.
Was this
And
the sorry? Was this when Spain was an ally with Britain during the Peninsular War?
yes, for 1812, Spain is still allied with
Yeah,
Britain.
yes. So yeah, so it was during this period. Okay, I see.
Yes, yes.
Oh,
Though of course ended up Spain not during the war. Pre-war, they talked about this. Oh, we fight British, we can also take over Florida. Well, that never happened. I mean, it was ended up being too much for them to chew anyway. I mean, that was correct choice anyway, because ultimately they can just buy Florida, right?
okay.
That's the
So
correct choice.
he's like this Manchurian candidate who could be like
Yeah,
could
he's
pull
also
like a
old
Benedict
and fat,
Arnold.
right? I mean, he's not like he's what can I say? Like he's not achieving anything. He's for the Spanish either.
It's like the worst asset going. Okay.
Yeah,
Um.
yeah, really, really. He was an asset for the British. Like we should have paid him.
Yeah. I don't know. Oh God. I mean, talk about like just disaster. Okay. So let's just move on here. So Brock moved after all this. Brock moved to the eastern end of Lake
Quickly,
Erie.
very quickly too. So that's
Yes.
part of the amazing thing about him is he's like here and then he's there. He's all over the place.
And
He's the rapid commander of the war. He's because the distances are huge, right?
yeah, so and because he moved quickly to confront the American general Stephen Van Rensselaer, who was attempting to invade. Who was the second invasion via across the Niagara River.
Mm. Yes, and that's where you get the Battle of Queenston Heights, and it becomes, I suppose, Brock's Trafalgar, and he dies there with a victory. Though he does make mistakes in this one, which is partly why he dies, because the Americans are crossing the river. Brock, in his usual alacrity, his speed, he's able to meet them in the river, and he's given them hell. Right, these guys are not ready for a littoral campaign like this. And again, a lot of the Americans are militia and refusing to get in the boats. So the regulars are going across. Actually, one of the militia commanders, I forget his name now. Oh, I wish I could remember his name. Doesn't matter. He impressed me because his men won't go across, so he just goes across by himself, basically. So and Winfield Scott's there. He's as a regular, of course, and he's across. The militia commander goes across. I'm going to be if my chaps won't come, but I'll come. And they're getting terrible treatment, but. One clever American, he takes some boats with some chaps who will go with him, not a small number, and they sail a little bit further up, right? And they're able to land at a different spot and see some high ground. That's Queenston Heights, right? So Queenston's a town, and that's the Heights is a hill there, and they basically flank the British there and shooting down on them. And Brock knows he has to take it. He has to take this hill. And he sends his men go up. They repulse. And Brock's like, okay, I'm going to lead you up. I'm going to go up again. I'm going to go up. And that's when Brock dies. The British were repulsed. And then Brock's second command, MacDonald, MacDonald is Brock's protege. He looks up to Brock. He said, oh, my general's dead. My friend is dead. My mentor is dead. I will take that hill. And then he leads the men and they go up. And guess what? MacDonald dies too. Or he's badly wounded and dies after the battle, trying to take this hill. And they can't do it. And for a brief moment, it looks like the Americans could at least fight it to a stalemate. It doesn't look like they're going to capture the whole British army or something. Nothing like Detroit or something, but it's not looking good. But then more troops turn up from the north under Sheaffe. Sheaffe's an interesting character. He's going to take over from Brock. And he's actually an American, amazingly. He's from Massachusetts. And he was at school in England when the revolution broke out. And so ended up being a British officer, and he's got family in both England, Canada, and America. So he's got family on the other side, and he leads some British as well as Canadian militia Lincoln militia, I think it was, who are like good, solid loyalists, and they take Queenston Heights and restore the situation before the Heights were taken and defeat the Americans. And once the Heights are taken, the Americans who cross the river, they surrender in enormous numbers, and it becomes another catastrophe. This is all 1812, by the way. So this is a 3-year war, but you've got 3 invasions in 1812. You've got the Hull one in the west, and we saw how that ended at Fort Detroit. You've got this other one under, what's his name again? Wrestler. But anyway, Winfield Scott's there. He's the one I can remember because he goes on to have greater things, but he's there. He's not the commander.
Yeah.
What's his name?
You,
Sorry?
you have William Wadsworth and Stephen Van Rensselaer, yes, and Winfield Scott.
Wadsworth's the militia commander. Thank you. That's the one I was trying to think of
Yeah.
earlier.
Oh, I see.
And
Okay, yeah.
yeah, they're captured. They're all captured. They captured large numbers of Americans, both these places. And the only other invasion this year, well, the third one is the one further east on the Wilkinson, the one that won't cross the border and just goes home.
I do want to add quickly, now there is another interesting figure that turns up after Brock was killed during this battle, and that is John Norton, who was a Scottish individual who adopted by Mohawks, and he basically goes quite native. If you look at him, pick portraits of him, he goes native. He's quite native.
I'll share
And
it if you like.
yeah, if you can find it, that's
Got it.
he just turns up with like Mohawk warriors to support the British during the battle, which must have been quite an interesting sight for the.
Oh, sure. Yeah, these guys, the Indians were hugely important, and they came out massively on the side of the British. The Americans criticized it. They tried to treat it like a war crime just to have Indians with you. But as the war goes on, they will also field Indians in battle. They're at the beginning, the main Indians they have are Seneca, who live in northern New York, and they use them use them very little at the beginning, just as more like as guides for the country. But as the war goes on, as things start to even out a bit, they have more Indians on their side, and a lot of Indians on the British side just go home, particularly after Tecumseh dies. But that's later. I mean, everything we talked about, all this stuff we talked about so far is just 1812, the year itself.
Yes, and I think one thing that did help the I think probably Tecumseh's greatest act to help the British. I just shared the screen here of Major John Norton. Look at that.
You've got it. Well done. I was struggling with the interface. It's my ignorance. I beg your pardon, but you've got it. Good. Or is that mine?
Yeah,
is that mine?
That's yours. I'm just showing you a screen.
Okay, I did it. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Glorious. Glorious stuff. So that's Major John Norton who turned up. I will say that one of Tecumseh's greatest act that helped Britain was probably the decision, and because he personally traveled to Alabama to meet with the Cree to basically support an uprising to target American settlers. And while this conflict is classed as, it's quite interesting because for Americans, many American historians, they class this as a separate thing. Well, because this is happening opposite ends of the country, but in many ways this is kind of like, and I don't know if this was Tecumseh's initiative or if this was like an order within Britain, but you're effectively opening up like a second front, to
yes,
sort of...
and that becomes a trend throughout the war. There's multiple ways in which second fronts are mentioned. I mean, we've gone quite a bit of detail about pre-war and 1812, but I don't know if we'll have time to go through like what goes on next, right? Because yes, there's the Creek War, but then also, of course, there's more famously in the Americans' benefit, New Orleans. But then there's the Chesapeake campaign and the blockade. It becomes a war that encompasses the entire United States.
Yeah, and I mean, just thinking about it, because this was from the American perspective here. So there's a book I mentioned, effectively, and this was like Stephen Van Rensselaer's assessment, and for American victory, they needed to capture Montreal and Quebec. This was in their mind, once you have those, you have control over the St. Lawrence, you have control over the Great Lakes, and this is where it's important. Now, of course, the British understood that this was America's aims that they wanted to take, and the British government's defensive strategy was, basically listen, um, Lower Canada is important. Upper Canada can be that sort of, that Upper Canada is where the fighting is going to go take place. This is where, not a sacrifice, but you have to sort of, you know Upper Canada can be the sort of battleground, but Lower Canada is that's important. That is the strategic
Mhm.
importance.
Yeah, well, Lower Canada. I mean, Upper Canada is like the American West at this point.
Mm,
The towns are small. Like York, which is going to become Toronto, is still a tiny place, right? So they make money there. But yeah, the old settlements in Lower Canada, Quebec, that's where that's the big prize, right? And there are
yeah,
battles fought there. There are battles fought there. Going into 1813, we get things like the Battle of Chateauguay, which is almost, it's not entirely a French affair. But the overall commander is Salaberry, who's a French officer in British service, and he uses his fencibles. Fencibles are a bit like in between militia and regulars. They're like they work on a regular military discipline, but they're defensive. They're not sent abroad. Um, I think there was a British commander there, a Scotsman. I forget exactly his name, and they perform well and they beat back the Americans. Natives are again involved, but most of the action's on the lakes because
yeah,
that gives you the ability to move around. Right? It
yeah,
takes one of the things that's a problem for both sides is the distances involved in the terrain, and that's why the opening campaign looks so good for the British because the Americans on the offensive, or at least strategically, though Brock goes tactically on the offensive, um, and that it puts the onus on them to go enormous distances and face the biggest logistic problems. Um, the Americans come from Kentucky, like large numbers of them in the West. They're not coming from Ohio, right? The Ohioans are particularly unwilling to leave their state for whatever reason that I don't know. I'm not making any comment on the modern day military prowess of people from Ohio. I'm just saying at the time. Um,
I
uh,
actually can answer that in
mm,
part. From my understanding, Tecumseh. Now we haven't really mentioned him fully, so
mhm.
I will just mention him briefly here. Tecumseh and his Indian Confederacy, which is quite amazing because he was actually, I mean, he was kind of like a quasi spiritual and political leader who was
Oh yes,
able
sure,
to
definitely.
unite many tribes, Indian tribes, particularly in Michigan, what is now what Michigan, Wisconsin, and Indiana, mainly in a lot of it in Indiana. And also you have these spillover tribes into Ohio. From my understanding, a lot of those settlers in Ohio who suffered going back 30 years before, regular native attacks. I think there was this constant worry of, and they saw this confederation forming, rising, with military support from Britain and political support. I actually think many in Ohio were like, I don't, we need to protect us because if we're on the back foot, they could just, quite easily with their number of warriors and the ferocity of their warriors could steamroll across Ohio and push them back to the, the Appalachians. So I think that was the fear for many.
Yes, I think so. And looking back, it might seem like they overestimated what the Indians could achieve militarily, but they didn't overestimate Tecumseh. Tecumseh really was great, and
Mm,
they were right to do so. I actually would like to quote Harrison, General Harrison of the Americans, later U.S. president, on Tecumseh. He says this: "The implicit obedience and respect which the followers of Tecumseh pay to him is really astonishing, and more than any other circumstance bespeaks him one of those uncommon geniuses which spring up occasionally to produce revolutions and overturn the established order of things. If it were not for the vicinity of the United States, he would perhaps be the founder of an empire that would rival in glory that of Mexico or Peru.
Yeah, I mean, from many accounts, he was a very charismatic, as you mentioned, just this charismatic figure, and um, he was able to I would say very important ally for Britain to have, and
Hugely.
very important figure, and even in Canada today, I mean, he's remembered in Canada, he's remembered in America to a certain point. Of course, Tecumseh Sherman, named
Yeah.
famous General Sherman, the scourge of the South and the destroyer of Atlanta, named after him. So steeped in some sort of military tradition, definitely.
Always it became a
Um,
myth, right? Because he died. He's not from Canada in any way, sense of form. He's from further south. He's Shawnee. They're from further south. They're traditional enemies of the Kentuckies people, the
yeah,
Kentucks, as they call them. And but he dies in Canada. He dies at Battle of Moraviantown, this is after Brock's dead. This is going into the next year now. I think it's 1813. I will double check my timeline. But
I was
yeah,
going to say
he
I was going to move on to 1813. So um, after Hull had this sort of I guess as you mentioned, some sort of mental breakdown for doing some
oh
sort of like
definitely in that breakdown. Definitely, it
yeah,
definitely broke.
yeah, like some really disastrous military decision. General William Henry Harrison took command of the American army in the Northwest,
Mm.
um, and obviously set out to retake Detroit, um, which was uh, defended by, as we mentioned, Tecumseh, but also Colonel Henry Proctor.
Yes, Proctor takes over from Brock and becomes the main commander in the West, so we're in Upper Canada. So it's hugely important for the war. He's not a terrible officer, but he's not a great officer. And when your resources are limited and you've got to balance these different interests, French, Indian, Loyalist, Yankee, Yankee Canadian, you kind of a little bit of greatness would go a long way, but he just doesn't have those qualities. And but he has, I mean, it's not like he has victories. It starts off really good, right? So,
No, uh,
go
I
on.
was just going to
Sorry.
say, because in fairness, now, of course, this is quite a well documented event because this was, you know, it did cause a bit of outrage in sociable circles in particularly in America and maybe in Britain as well.
Mm.
That sort of officers weren't very happy about this. So you had a detachment of Harris's army were defeated at Frenchtown.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
Big victory.
big victory, and prisoners were taken. American prisoners were taken, and uh, basically the accusation from the American side was that Proctor didn't have the guards that were left in charge weren't willing to stop the natives, like the particularly the Potawatomi allies, basically scalping 60 captives, um,
Maybe
60
more.
American
I
captives.
think. I think the number might be more actually. But yeah, I think there's different estimates. But well, the thing is, um, the casualties include very few wounded. Well, what happened to the wounded? There are about it's like 400 to 500 dead, right? And then about the same number as prisoners. The prisoners were taken by the Indians, and they kept those they could use because what the Indians like to do with prisoners, there's a few things they did with them. Number one, you could ransom them, and they sort of get money from them. Sometimes they'd adopt them and force them into an Indian lifestyle. In some cases, you could still be ransomed after that. Um, and if you, in some cases, they torture them horribly to death. But in particular, if they couldn't move at the speed they thought acceptable through the bush, then they killed them. So you either were killed in the battle, or you were wounded in the battle and then killed, or then they were taken prisoner. So it's either death or prisoner, but there wasn't a large contingent of wounded people. So the
No,
American,
I mean, the interesting thing about this was became the rallying cry for many for like the
yeah,
propaganda side for America. What was it? The was the
River Raisin.
remember
Remember the raisin.
remember the river raisin? Never again, never again. It will never happen again, never again. uh, and
Yeah, but
I,
of course that just adds to the fear the Indians have, which becomes helpful later on again. I mean, I mentioned how at Detroit, Brock used the threat of the Indians to get them to surrender, and Brock kept control of them. Tecumseh was with him though, and Tecumseh was known for his mercy and known for keeping control of his people. At the River Raisin, Tecumseh wasn't present. So on the one hand, Proctor didn't have the level of control that Brock had, but also Tecumseh wasn't there, keeping control of the Indians. Tecumseh kept them well behaved. Tecumseh and Brock. Proctor just lost control of the situation after the battle. Actually, he withdrew, but not far, but he withdrew to defensive positions because he was worried Harrison was going to come and fight him, right? Because he defeated a separate contingent from the main force, and then but actually Harrison actually then withdraws. So he could have stayed there and stayed control, but he didn't know that. Anyway, he made the wrong call, but it's an understandable decision.
I mean, in fairness, because effectively the Indians are like auxiliary troops in some regards.
Yes.
And even going back to ancient Rome, you did have instances where auxiliary troops did go, went a bit too far in some circumstances and may have triggered infamous revolts in the Middle East somewhere.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
yeah,
I was going to say the Americans have their auxiliaries too, and who are America's auxiliaries? They're people like Joseph Wilcox. But this is a little further east, still in Upper Canada. But Joseph Wilcox was a Irishman who fought alongside Brock in Queenston Heights, and then decided to change sides. He's like Canada's Benedict Arnold, and he raised a Canadian volunteers. They were called. There wasn't very many of them, but they caused nightmare for the Americans because they had when they'd raid, because they were constantly raiding backwards and forwards on both sides, right? There's so many offensives in this war. Each year, both sides would have offensives to the other side's territory every single year of the war. And Joseph Wilcox and his people, they had political scores to settle. They didn't like the established leaders in Canada and the families who were in control, so they would go out of their way to burn stuff down, right? And they created a nightmare for the Americans because the Americans knew that the British had more capacity to retaliate than the Americans themselves did, because the British can hit everywhere because we control the seas. All right, particularly after that 6-month period, the Americans do well at sea. After that, it's not such an issue, and we're everywhere we want to be. If we want to be in New Orleans, we can be in New Orleans. We want to be well, we couldn't take New Orleans, but you know what I mean. The ships could be there. There was no issue landing somewhere. And so they would reprimand not only him, another American, an actual American who was called Dr. Sirius, kind of a very sinister kind of name. I forget the full name now, but he just by his own initiative raised up a few a rabble from northern New York and started burning down Canadian towns. So him and Joseph Wilcox and other Canadian volunteers really did some nasty stuff to the Canadians, and the British made them pay for it.
I mean, it just sort of like descended into sort of like robber baron banditry by the sound of it.
Because they had things. They had most of the Americans, like, let's say Harrison or Hull, they don't know anything about Canada or about they're not deeply emotionally invested in specific things about Canada. Neither is Brock, really. I mean, he doesn't. He cares about his career and cares about Britain, cares about his country. I suppose he cares about Upper Canada in the sense that he governs the place, but he doesn't have some hatred for people on the other side of the river. But people like Joseph Wilcox did, as a local who lived in Upper Canada and had political ambitions there that were then not successful. So he wanted to hurt people. Yeah, that's part of his motivation. And that's the same with the Indians, right? Because the Indians wanted to hurt some people who they felt they'd done hurt to them. Joseph Wilcox wanted to hurt people. He felt it hurt them. It hurt himself. So that makes the war much more brutal. And the people, generally speaking, the top leadership were not in favor of this, right? The Americans weren't in favor of it. The British were not happy about the River Raisin massacre, not at all. This was not. This was really not what we wanted. Even though they were willing to use the fear, to use the threat of it to instill fear on British Americans when it suited them, they knew that we had to relay some level of civilized warfare. Take, for example, hanging of prisoners. We captured lots of people who were British nationals under our law. We didn't hang them. Technically, under our law, we could, but in terms of the land war, we did not, because of course Americans also have prisoners, right? So we just don't hang each other's prisoners. Yeah, there were Yankees serving. People born in America were serving the British military, right? Because I mentioned so many Yankees were living in Canada. So there was basically a common understanding. Even though our law says you can hang traitors like this, I use traitors maybe in inverted commas. I mean, this guy might have been moved to America when he's 6 years old, for example. You know, we're just going to not hang each other's respective nationals. So that's the level of understanding that the top leadership was able to have.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, the problem that he got, because remember, this is like only 30 years after, the wars of independence.
Sure.
You would have soldiers, commanders, I mean, possibly figures who were born within, a British colony, or may have
Although,
even served in the British military itself. So it's
yes. Oh,
back
absolutely.
before and then maybe sided with the Patriots and sort of went on that route. But yeah.
So it suited both of them to be a bit more tolerant. Yeah. So that's
Oh,
the leadership. Not the guys on the ground didn't always feel that way. Whether we're talking about the Indians or talking about guys like Joseph Wilcox, they sometimes had scores to settle, so they were willing to be more bloody.
yeah. No, fair enough. So, May 1813, Proctor and Tecumseh siege Fort Megis. Is that pronounced?
Meigs? I always thought it was Meigs, but
Meigs.
I'm not an expert on American place names.
Maybe Meigs. Yeah. In Ohio, northwestern Ohio.
Mm.
And so in this siege, the fort's commander didn't have I believe that is William. Is it William Henry Harrison, the fort commander,
I think
or
it
was
is
it
Harrison
J?
now. I think it's Harrison now, or
Yeah,
someone under Harrison's command. Harrison is more involved now. Yes.
yeah, it may have been Green Clay or someone like that. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, um, yeah, I think it was Harrison. Now, yeah, he didn't have like a Hull moment where he had a sort of a spurg out and panic,
Well, you can't
because
now. Sorry, you can't, because if after the River Raisin, the whole thing we surrendered to avoid being massacred, but at Frenchtown they surrendered and did get massacred. So there's no point in surrendering now. So there is a problem. What happened from a military point of view too?
yeah, because he got no choices now, as you said.
Yeah.
I mean, Tecumseh fighters did ambush American reinforcements uh, while the siege was ongoing, but the siege continued to hold out, um, and it resulted, I think, in Procter and Tecumseh actually withdrawing back to Canada.
Yes, indeed. Proctor is not performing with the same kind of dash that Brock did. But in fairness, I mean, he never loses. He never loses his army. So he's not one of the big disasters of the war. And frankly, most offensives in this war don't go well. Right. So
Mm.
there are some other forts taken on both sides. So the Americans take Fort George at one point. They take Amherstburg at some point. Usually we get them back. We got back Fort George. Amherstburg, we don't get back to the peace treaty. So there's a lot of backwards and forwards, a lot of offensives. Right, there's all these forts along the lakes, and they all get sieged. Some of them never get taken. Some of them get taken and then taken back and then taken again, like over and over. Okay, so I wouldn't be too harsh on him just for that, but sure, He's not performing phenomenally.
Mm. And then, of course, we move on to the Battle of Lake Erie, which
Okay,
we
great American. This is a legitimate 100%. No question. Fantastic American victory.
Yeah, this is an American victory. I'll give it to them. So I have to give it to,
September to
yeah.
October was good time because you've got September 10th, you've got Battle of Lake Erie, and then October you've got the Battle of the Thames, which is a defeat of Proctor and Tecumseh, and in which Tecumseh dies. But then in the end of October, you've got Battle of Chateauguay, where the Franco-Canadians beat back the Americans there. And actually, we skipped over two good British victories in June. June was a good year for the good month for the British. June the 1st, we take the Chesapeake. I know we focus on the land issue, but the Chesapeake victory is pretty good.
Mm.
I don't mean the land Chesapeake. I mean the USS Chesapeake, the ship defeated by HMS Shannon, and that brings a definitive end to America's string of victories at sea, and now they stick to their ports. Okay, and the only time they come out of the ports only to get captured, basically, for the rest of the war. So if they try anything, it's a fail from that point at sea. Stony Creek and Beaver Dams are pretty important for Canadians, I think. Beaver Dams involves Laura Secord, who's a Canadian folk hero. She's a loyalist, actually. I think she's from New York State originally. She's an older woman now. I think 40s, 50s. I'm not saying she's super old, but she gets news the Americans are coming, and then she walks overnight through the woods to go and find General Fitzgibbon. I don't think Colonel Fitzgibbon, I think, and who's a Scottish Canadian officer focusing on counter guerrilla campaigns against people like Joseph Wilcox, and warns the Americans are coming. He bands up with John Norton, you mentioned earlier, and they are able to take on a much larger American force, and once again use a bit of deception to capture them, because they convince they beat the Americans in a fight, and then they have a parley, but it's wooded and misty, so the Americans can't see how many British there are, and they convince them to surrender. Fitzgibbon convinces them to surrender, but he has to pretend he has many more soldiers than he has, and he has to keep the Americans docile until more soldiers can actually turn up, because he's worried if they realize how few British there are, that they will rescind their surrender. But he pulls it off, and so that's a defeat for Joseph Wilcox and the Canadian Volunteers, who are on the American side. But then that's a great month. Yeah, you get to September, and then we get to Lake Erie, and there you get Perry. Not Perry of Canada fame, but the elder brother of Japan fame. It's the elder brother of the Perry who opens up Japan to commerce in the 18.
Oh yeah, Oliver Hazard Perry.
Yes. Fantastic victory. I mean, so on the lakes, both sides have been building ships. Like ships, they're a bit different to sea ships. I understand that I'm not a nautical expert, but the ships are a bit different, and they've been like an arms race. They're constantly building, and some of the commanders they're building so well that they don't want to go fight. But Perry's like, no, we're gonna go fight. We're gonna go sink the British, and they have a really brutal fight, actually. And
yes.
The Americans pull it off. They capture the entire British fleet on Lake Erie, and Lake Erie becomes an American lake. So that is one on the Canadian frontier where they do really great. Perry was a great officer, and chivalrous officer too. He takes Barclay, the commander of the British, under his wing. He's a young guy. Barclay's a really young guy. He's like in a position kind of ahead of his age. Though the Americans are mostly very young too, because this is all where on the British side is where the cast-offs are, right? The more respected or famous guys, they're in Spain at this point, so they're going to come to Canada for the end of the war, and Barclay looks after him, and
I mean, Oliver. One thing I know about Oliver Hazard, he was quite young as well. I mean, you mentioned he was quite. I think compared to a lot of the others, he is quite a young fellow. I don't know how old.
He's not old.
No.
Yeah, he's 30-something. Barclay was 28.
Barclay is 28. This is what I mean. You find us sort of like have these, older, corrupted, bit sleazy and sort of cowardly.
The Revolutionary War guy. Yeah.
yeah, these relics of the revolution, and you know, their understand of fighting is like maybe like spycraft and deceit and even maybe like sort of proto guerrilla warfare.
Sure.
And then you have these sort of younger, more dynamic characters who are like, no,
Yeah.
we're going to be fighting and we're going to fight on the lakes in the open ground. It's going to be just like two proper armies fighting, and we're going to win. Sort of mentality, which I do respect.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, Perry and Winfield Scott, I guess they're the same kind of mold, same kind of character we're talking about. Um, they were wanting to fight a proper war. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah,
both of them did well as a result. Um, yeah, no, Perry's got my full respect.
yeah.
Shall we also then mention the next month? I think we should mention the Battle of the Thames, and maybe we should wrap it up. And if we've gone through a lot of detail on the war, and we're only halfway through the war, so if we're going to continue at this
Yes.
kind of pace, maybe we can do a part two. We can talk about part two. We can talk about American the next American assaults at the end of 1813, talk about 1814, when the Americans are definitely fighting much better on land, but then also the chaps from Spain turn up and perform very well. That's on the British side. I mean, the Peninsula Campaign veterans, they turn up. And then the Chesapeake campaign, where we burn Washington, I think it'll be another 2 hours to get through all that, perhaps. So maybe that could be a part two.
Yeah. No, that'll
But
be a
let's
part two. Yeah.
so
I
we
will
but let's
say,
do the Battle of the Thames, because this is the end of Tecumseh. So that's
yeah,
maybe a
let's
nice
do,
place to stop.
yeah, Battle of the Thames, because I think Tecumseh's death is a kind of key moment in the
Oh, for
war.
sure.
Um,
Yeah, definitely. This is
because I
Proctor
mean,
again. Go on, sorry.
I was just going to say, because with Tecumseh's death, um, can I just quickly, Tecumseh Confederation tribe, does it continue or does it collapse or slowly sort of disintegrate?
His brother tries to maintain it. So they're a pair, him and his brother. His brother is a prophet, actually. He's announced a new religion for them, or like a sort of like a restored religion of their ancestral religion, so, which involves rejecting white culture and restoring elements of the old religion, but also probably more like a new religion as well. It has particular ideas about the nature of the divine that are probably influenced by Christianity. If I remember correctly, both of them had Christian educations. So actually, both of them were very exposed to. I think it was some weird Christian sect. It wasn't Quakers, it was something like Quakers, like Moravians or something, that had given them both of them religious education. And his brother came out as this prophet teaching this new religion, and Tecumseh, the older brother, says, well, okay, you've got the religion, I'm going to fight for it, I'm going to be the political and military leader, you're the religious leader. And so after Tecumseh dies, his brother tries to keep that going, but he doesn't. He has his own qualities, but he's not Tecumseh. He's not the same guy. He's not the guy who can lead them through the war. And of course, Indians continue to serve on the British side under, you mentioned, John Norton. Matthew Elliott's still around. Another guy called it doesn't matter. I forget. There's other people anyway. But that dynamism is gone. That unity is gone. Yeah, it does make a huge difference. On the other hand, by this point, the British are there in larger and larger numbers, right? So the British, the Indians were incredibly important for enabling Canada to survive 1812, certainly as well as they did. I mean, the victories at things like Fort Detroit, they were involved in Queenston Heights, Fort Dearborn, of course, really give the British a really good first 6 months of the war. Them being less involved as we go forward is less a problem for the British, maybe a problem for them, though, when you get to the peace treaty. And the British don't have any reason to make them the priority at those negotiations, which is unlucky for them. But anyway, maybe that's a thing for next time. In the Battle of the Thames, the Americans are marching into. They've crossed over they've got Fort Detroit back now, right? And then they cross over and they capture Fort Amherstburg, which is directly opposite Detroit. And then they're marching up through Lower Canada from the west. And Proctor's withdrawing. He withdraws to the Thames. He wants to withdraw further. actually. But he's promised Tecumseh he will fight because Tecumseh is unhappy. Tecumseh doesn't want to be in Canada. Yeah, he's not Canadian. He's from further south. He's from what's now American territory, and
Yeah.
it's really hard for him to convince the Indians to follow him. So at this point, they're already starting to lose some of them, and Tecumseh is using every ounce of his charisma to keep some of them together, and it forces Proctor to promise to fight. And the Battle of the Thames happens because Proctor feels he has to keep his promise to Tecumseh. And so they fight at this location, which he hopes is a good defensive spot, but it's not that great. And the Americans come on, and the British are between woods. There's Indians in the woods, so it looks like they can so the Indians is going to do a flanking attack on the Americans, and while the British form a line between the woods. But actually, the British numbers are depleted. From of course, their numbers are never very high in this war, and they actually can't make a very solid line. And the Americans, by this point, they have some better troops. They certainly have some better commanders. So Harrison is here in command, and they have a very unique thing in this war is they have a cavalry charge. There's not a lot of cavalry charges in this war, but the American Kentucky, I know Kentucky's famous horses today, right? They have the Kentucky cavalry here, and they charge the British and are able to repel. The battle's really short. The line is
Sorry to interrupt. In this image I got on screen here of the battle, where you could see Tecumseh, it depicts Tecumseh's death and the natives fighting and the Indians fighting and the British side. You can see in the foreground, so just in the background there, you can see what is the cavalry charge you'll mention. You can see in the background.
Yes, I see it. That's it. So because there's just troops going towards the woods to fight the Indians, and then there the cavalry is against the British. And a line should be able to resist the cavalry charge, but the cavalry charge is good. I mean, I don't want to take away from them, but also the British line is spread too thin, and so they withdraw. The army is not destroyed or anything, but there is a moment when it appears Proctor could be captured, but the British are able to make a successful withdrawal from the battlefield. The Americans then fight the Indians in the woods, and Tecumseh is killed. And there's like loads of people who claim to kill him. And it's a rather gruesome image from Pierre Berton's book on the War of 1812, on the first year of the war. And it describes how after the battle, some Kentuckians, they found an Indian and they started skinning him. A dead Indian, this is. And they started skinning him, taking strips of his skin to say that so they could go back to Kentucky and say, this is Tecumseh's skin. And the guy who recorded this, he asked them, how do you know it's Tecumseh? And they said, it doesn't matter. No one in Kentucky will know.
Oh, I mean, true, yeah. He didn't know. Nobody would know. I mean, according to this painting, the mounted volunteer who led the assault on Tecumseh's position, so this is Colonel Richard M. Johnson, is the one depicting here, basically killing Tecumseh. So he's the one on the horse, the grey horse here, shooting Tecumseh. So in this image, he is the one that's claiming that he was the one that killed. Whether he did or not, who knows?
We have no way to know, and we don't even know where Tecumseh's buried. The Indians took his body away and buried it secretly. So somewhere in Ontario, there was Tecumseh's body in the ground. Well, I suppose there'll be nothing left now, but still, somewhere his flesh has fed the earth. But we don't know where. And so he's not he's not a Canadian. He's important to Canadians' history, and he's a bit of a folk hero of Canada. There's a lot of records of people who, I think it was like a common thing at that for the next generation and a half for people to tell stories of when they met Tecumseh. He made an impression on everyone he met. And there's in Pierre Berton's book, there's a collection of descriptions of Tecumseh from different Canadians from Upper Canada. Say they met him when they were a child and how impressive he was. Strong, handsome, enigmatic, charismatic, magnetic personality. And even though he's not from Canada, he died there, and in that sense, he's become part of the Canadian national story. And he made, by fighting the Americans and repelling them, and his tragic story made Canada more likely than not by helping to win that first 6 months of the war.
Yeah, and so one thing that's quite interesting. Maybe this explains why you had the sort of revenge aspect by America, but like the Shawnee, for example, which seemed to make up a significant portion of like Tecumseh's Confederacy, and
He was
those
Shawnee.
sorts of tribes. Yeah, she was Shawnee himself, and other tribes were forced, westwards into like Arkansas and Oklahoma, with many of the other tribes as well.
Yes, I think they got a better deal if they stayed in Canada. Though I know there's cons- controversies about that these days, but still, yes, it's not good. And of course, that comes from the policy of Andrew Jackson, who fights in the war as an Indian fighter and then wins the Battle of New Orleans. So it does have an uncomfortable legacy for the Indians. But I think they had to fight. They couldn't not fight. The American settlers are spreading, and you can either just cave in and or you can fight. And I respect them for choosing to fight, even if my sympathies culturally are generally on the settler side. It's nonetheless they have my absolute respect as people fighting for their vision of their country.
I mean, well, to get onto this for a bit, and look, talk about the contemporary thing. A lot of, and I, in my research, there's a lot of, I mean, that's not be by the way, a lot of anti-white sentiment from a lot of the native bit, because all European powers abused us, and we were the pawns in their wars and stuff, and particularly referring to the War of 1812 and other wars.
Mm.
And I will say, while yes, there was some unfairly treatment, definitely, but Tecumseh, for example, he was not, entirely the angel of pure innocence as well. He did go down to the Cree, who were at peace. He did invoke an uprising, a pretty bloody and gruesome uprising, which wasn't backed by all Cree, but what was it, the Red Sticks, or that
Yes.
sort of, yeah, the Red Sticks. And so, there was, the natives weren't like some childlike people who were oblivious for this sort of level of political maneuvering. There was quite some Machiavellian nature about them as well. So, and yeah, it's shit that they lost, but um, that this yeah, they tried and they failed. And when it sort of comes down to it, I mean, also I mentioned before as well in the War of 1812, probably one, um, the Six Nations of the Grand River, which were separate to Tecumseh's Confederacy, and maybe this is some legacy of tribal stuff. They were very, very hostile to the tribes in Indiana and Ohio, and that actually, fast forwarding a bit in history, when we go to Sitting Bull, for example, when he had his his war with the States and the Dakotas and everything, they did travel the Sioux. They went into Canada, and again they had the same problems of other tribes in Canada weren't really willing to share or weren't willing to help.
Yes, I think actually this was a problem for the Indians, and Tecumseh actually recognized this. There was a particular quote that I would love to share now you brought this particular point up.
Yeah, go
Uh,
ahead.
Let me find he says this: "It is true, I am Shawnee. My forefathers were warriors. Their son is a warrior. From them, I take only my existence. From my tribe, I take nothing. I am the maker of my own fortune, and oh, that I might make that of my red people and my country as great as the conceptions of my mind when I think of the spirit that rules the universe." And I think in that little speech, the speech goes on, but that's the key point I wanted to find there. He mentions his tribe, but it's actually he was bringing a message of racial unity, basically, for North American Indians. He thought they could put their tribe behind them. And the Shawnee are an interesting group because they'd actually already been kicked off their land. Well, actually, they weren't the only tribe in the situation, but they were essentially nomadic. Okay, other tribes were more settled. But Shawnee were already moving around, And I think this given the perspective that, we can transcend our specific location, we can transcend our tribe, and we can unite and focus on being, as he put it in this speech, the red people, and make a new country for ourselves. And the spirit that rules the universe. I mean, that's that last end there. We mentioned the religion element here too, because they had sort of adopted a sort of monotheism, I think, from the influence of
Yeah,
Christianity.
they call it the native. It's called the Native American Church, which still operates today, and it it's described as like Christian native syncretic thing,
Mm.
where they allow Protestants and followers of native religions into it. So, um, yeah,
So it's about bringing it together. So we want to transcend the tribe. So we're not just going to be Shawnee and Iroquois and whatever. We're going to or Cree. We're going to be the red people. And we're going to have this one religion with the Great Spirit, and we can be flexible on how you do it locally, but we're going to be united, and we're going to
yeah.
make this country ours. And yeah, I admire him enormously, actually. Yeah, you mentioned he's not like some little angel or something. Sure, not at all. I don't. You shouldn't approach these people expecting that, like, oh, they love
I'm
nature, life so much. No, they love their
no,
people. I mean, Tecumseh is like a patriot, a nationalist, but he's a creative nationalist, not a retroactive one or a reactionary one. He's like trying to
no,
create a nation, and
no.
I enormously respected, admired that, and I find him inspirational in his own way. And I don't see there's any
I do
reason why.
find it.
Oh,
I
sorry.
do find it. Yeah, no, I find it inspirational, and I've one of the problems is, and there's a follower who's followed my channel for quite some time, and he's been around and asked for, and he's actually I don't see him around as much now, but he's called the English Loyalist. Don't know if you've ever heard of him, and he usually comments like every now and then. And from my understanding, he is a Native American in Canada.
Hmm.
He's a Native American. He's one of the tribes in Canada. Um, and um, you know, the sort of and the trouble is when you look at Native American politics today, in Canada and in the United States, it's very left wing dominated. It's dominated by the left politically. A lot of them vote, for the in America, Democrats or the Liberal Party in Canada, or the National Democratic or whatever, or Greens or whatever left wing parties there. And one thing that I think, and what he said is in previous times, is that you it's you can play the victim card, and I think in the past it does work playing the victim for certain gains, right? But at the same time, Tecumseh wouldn't want you to be like he would never want the native his people to be considered victims or going cap in hand as like victims and beggars, you know.
Definitely not. That's not Tecumseh. Tecumseh was a fighter and a patriot who loved his people, and had a vision for them.
Yeah.
And speaking of the modern natives, I'm not an expert on modern natives at all, but I would just say this: in the modern world, being left wing is normal. So them being left wing is not a sign of like their cultural decline. It's ours. They're left wing because that's the establishment actually in America and Canada. They're not rebelling against it. They've adopted the orthodoxy.
Yeah, that's the orthodoxy, and that's what they get the most out of in their mind. And
Yeah.
I mean, the tragedy itself is, you know, that's what keeps them on the reservation. I mean, today, of course, the big thing in native. I mean, I met when a few years ago there was a group of Americans, and there was one particular from Arizona, and he was, I think he was like half like mixed
Mm.
native. Um, but you still have he was talking about like the reservations, like his grandparents on the still lived on the reservations and things like that. And um, this was years and years ago, so this was before I sort of looked into it. And um the problem is the reservation system still is kind of like when they say reservations are outdated, they shouldn't exist. I actually do think in some degree they shouldn't exist now. And I don't want to sound like a bleeding heart leftist liberal or anything like that, but I do. When I looked into say like Sitting Bull and what the Sioux had to, or Geronimo, like what they went through, what the Americans did. Like there's this one sign, right? Um, when Sitting Bull returned to the United States and his tribe were put on this reservation, there were, you know, there was a sign which said like, uh, no chiefs, no masters, um, all's like democratic virtue or something like that. And I just immediately when I thought of that, I just thought, this sounds really like Bolshevik revolutionary rhetoric here.
Yes, sad. It's abuse in a way, cultural abuse.
It is, and I mean, I actually did gain some sympathy, not from like a sort of like a left wing sort of point of view of evil white colonialism or anything like that, but just the fact that there was this anti-hierarchical and that this sort of like extreme liberal uh, society
Sure.
being formed in the wake of the American Civil War. And I can understand why a lot of, especially friends of ours who are from the South and very hostile to the country post Lincoln, um the American Republic after the Civil War. I mean, it kind of was like a really heightened authoritarian state. It was like a junta in some ways.
Well, I don't know as much about that later history, but I think you can see elements of that in what I think I mentioned earlier about the treatment of the Federalist journalists in democratic areas. That
Yeah,
this is not nice treatment that yeah, there was an authoritarian streak in the in. I mean, I don't. It's a bit anachronistic, but to me, the Republicans are kind of like the left in the area we're talking about. Republican hyphen Democrats or Democrats hyphen Republicans. Maybe that's anachronistic. I retract that actually because I think that's too much putting modern categories onto that. But they were the radicals, shall we anyway, and they were trying to reform society in new ways. They weren't all so much like that. There were more conservative ones, but certainly Jefferson, people close at him, were on the more radical side of that, and it's not appealing to me personally. I mean, we've talked mostly about history today, and we've not made it too political. I would just say that, yeah, okay, you and I, as I said, we both come from a patriotic right wing point of view, pro English, pro our own people. But that doesn't mean when studying something like Tecumseh, even though he said some horrible things about white people. I should share one. I will share one more Tecumseh quote to put this in context. What I'm then going to say. I put it on. X. Actually, I quoted him on X. He said He said this. He's speaking to the Creek in the South, right? Let the white race perish, burn their dwellings, destroy their stock, slay their wives and children, that the very breed may perish. Okay, but then the same guy will then defend prisoners from slaughter in Canada, defend Americans, that is, and he would be a great friend of Brock. He really was impressed with Brock.
and take orders. Take some like
Yeah,
orders
sure,
from British
sure.
High
I
Command,
think he
and
was. This was words for the Creek, but ultimately what I want to say is, it doesn't matter that he was sort of like should I say, a racial enemy. I mean, that's probably exaggerating actually, but I think some people on the American traditional right might see it that way. That doesn't matter. The virtues are actually. I sound like a universalist now, but the virtues are universal, like courage, patriotism, loyalty.
yeah.
These things are possible for all men, and so if they materialize in an Englishman, fantastic. But when you see them in someone like Tecumseh or any other race, they're still impressive. They're still worthy of admiration.
I do think Tecumseh. I mean, one big thing I think I will mention about the Cree, because we'll talk about this next time, but the Cree were largely intermixed at this point. There was a lot of
Yeah.
intermixing with Europeans, predominantly Anglos, right? And also French and stuff as well. But predominantly Anglos. You had the intermixing with Europeans, and not all of the Cree. A lot of the Cree didn't welcome Tecumseh. They didn't want him there because they viewed this as it would be a disaster, right? If there was encouraging, but the Red Sticks, the ones that did encourage it, I think Tecumseh knew that they would rise up, they would commit a lot of massacres, which they did. A lot of they cause a massive amount of problems for the Americans in Alabama and places like that, which they did. But I think also Tecumseh knew it's not like it was going to be successful. It wasn't going to be like a successful thing. He just wanted, you know, um, to America to have a second front so that they could have to go and focus, down south.
Yeah, he wanted to win. He's playing to win.
Yeah, he's playing to win. Yeah, he's not like some ideologically driven loon,
Yeah.
who would like say no, we defeat the white man at all costs sort of thing. And to be honest, I think he he was probably lying a lot when he was giving that speech, so that proclamation. I mean, yeah, I mean he wanted a lot of the Cree who were disaffected with the American settlers and American overlordship. He was speaking to them, and he got
Yeah, he
them to
wanted
do
to
what they
fight.
wanted.
And they were half. And you mentioned the race mixed element. Well, the leadership of the Red Sticks was half white. It was half
Yeah,
Scottish. His dad was
they
Scottish.
had like Anglo. They had like British names and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally British name. You're absolutely right. I was like Weatherson or Witherspoons or something. Like, what was his name? I'll find him. The Creek War massacre at Fort Mims. Who was the guy? Weatherford, William Weatherford, and Peter McQueen. You could meet them down the pub in Sheffield, right? Or you could meet them at the massacre of white settlers at Fort Mims. They were the leaders of the Red Sticks. So Weatherford was half Scottish. McQueen, I think, was also half Scottish. I'll double check that. Not sure, but Weatherford definitely was.
I tell you what, when Scots can be good, sometimes Scots can be really good, but sometimes they can be really cringe. When they're cringe, they're really cringe.
Yeah. Oh, no arguments there. By the end of the war, I mean, we're going ahead now, but the leader in the east would be a Quebecer Scot, actually, the first ever Canadian-born British general would be Drummond, I think his name was, and his Scottish, born in Quebec. So they would do good. They would do good in this one. They do a lot of good. Norton, as you mentioned, also Scottish. Anyway, I think that might be a good place to wrap it up. We've gone on for a long time. It's good. I must say. I want to say thank you for having me on. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think we haven't answered our fundamental question, right? Our question was who won the War of 1812? I mean, I think people probably get where this is going from our point of view, but we started summarizing the entire war, and we're only halfway through. So shall we do a part 2?
I think we should we'll have to do a part 2 because for me, like the sort of ending finale, like the epic, like the storming of the Black Gates at Mordor is for me like the burning of Washington D.C. and then the burning of the White House, because I know that's not the end, but that kind of feels like, okay, that for America they have to wrap the war up now. It's like it's got it. It's kind
a lot of things happened in 1814 to convince them that. Yes, you're right.
They have to wrap up now. And also, before I go, I mean, at that particular time as well, the war is wrapping up as well. Will begin to wrap up in the peninsula, and the British government does ask Wellington, if Wellesley at the time will become Wellington, if he would go over to America and help out. His response is basically to the Prime Minister, "Lol, no, the Americans aren't worth my time," basically.
Yes. He does also give some strategic advice as well, and that's that the war is about the lakes. But by this point, because the war at sea is over, The
Yeah,
Americans
it's done.
have clearly failed again and again to conquer Canada. So if we're going to do the next stage, if the war goes into 1815, the objective on the British side is to punish America, and you start to see that in the second half of 1814, of which the burning of Washington is the good example, and then there are failed examples in Baltimore and New Orleans. Though New Orleans takes place after the peace treaty. But if you're really going to make this work, Wellington says, or Wellesley, we have to control the lakes. So you need a good naval commander, and you need lots of ships. And the British government thinks, oh no, we have to build lots of ships, and we have to send the navy, and it's going to cost lots of money. Let's just sign the peace treaty. Let's go back to the status quo.
Yeah.
So he that advice he gives encourages them to make peace. I won't say it's decisive, but it's part of the puzzle.
No, I mean, yeah, I say after Baltimore. I mean, I do think though the maybe not saying enough, but the actual burning of DC feels like, like the sacking of Rome. Like it's kind of like a pivotal moment for America.
It's like the first burning of Rome, the one described by Livy when the Gauls do it, when Rome's not an empire, right?
Yeah,
in the early years of Rome, the Gauls burn it. And that's like a test for Rome. Like, can they come back from that? And the answer is yes. And the American answer is yes too.
I mean, I said at the beginning of the stream, you had like these political ideologue, patriot, radical types who were, were doing basically clowning around when a war needs to be fought. I do think, looking at it, from what I've seen of this, after the burning of Washington DC, those sorts of people are, as I say, bitch slapped back into reality. I mean,
actually, I think the bitch slapping happens earlier to a great extent in terms of the officers on the Canadian front, right? So because the crap officers there are defeated in 1812 and 1813. So by the beginning of 1814, they're already out of favor. The problem is that no one told anyone in the Chesapeake, right? So because the burning of Washington is late, right? It's only a few months of war left, a couple of months really. 5 months. And when they turn up there, the embarrassing thing, those people who you're referring to being bitch slapped, well, who are they? Well, they're President Madison himself, Monroe himself.
That's what, yeah.
They're at the Battle of Bladensburg. It's the very top who still haven't cottoned on. Monroe tries to take command of the army at Bladensburg, but he doesn't have the authority to do. So he just starts giving orders to sections of the army, therefore creating confusion. God knows how he ends up having a successful presidential run after that nonsense. But Bladensburg is the battle that precedes the burning of Washington. That should be clear for those who don't know. Madison himself barely escapes being captured. So this really brings it home personally to these guys who run the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's the election afterwards. I mean, the Federalists did actually make some gains, which is not, I mean, let's be honest, it's not unexpected given all the shenanigans and sort of high drama that went on there. But
they have an election in 1812, right? So at the end of 1812, and the Federalists make gains because the war has been embarrassing so far, right? Because they've 3 invasions of Canada, all defeated. Yeah, the only thing they've got is a few victories at sea, which they're proud of, but led by guys who are from Federalist areas. And so the Federalists make gains then. But by 1816, the Republicans have won a propaganda victory, and so this is because this is after the war, and going forward until the modern day, what is the war about? It's about the Battle of New Orleans.
Yeah. This is what I was going to get to. Like, guys, we may have been humiliated. We may have had super shit generals. We may have been had our asses handed to us, and one general had a psychotic breakdown. We allowed our capital to be burnt. We have a dipshit president who fled in disgrace. But we won a small shitty area next to a swamp. Yay!
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's well, I really have to wrap this up. It's going to get noisy in the house room. So thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been a great chat. I really enjoyed it. I hope we can do a part 2 sometime soon, and we'll discuss the second half of the war in more detail.
No worries. I'll put your channel in the description below, and what I'll do is I'll
Very thanks.
contact you, and we'll organise a part two at some point. And thank you everyone for watching. And until then, we'll see you next time for the part two of Who Won the War of 1812. Good night.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.